woke up one morning and he was dead.
I've known Dan for years, and he's one of the best frontmen I've ever seen, actually, just in music in general.
Between all those characters, Russ was clearly the lighter side, and definitely made it a little more fun to be in ZAO.
There really are no personality conflicts. We get along better than just about any group of touring people that I've ever seen.
It's going better than it's ever gone before, and there's no real drama anymore. And it's finally able to be a real band.
The rebirth of something out of nothing, and there's still the same thing, but it's been totally, like, you know, as strange as it sounds, it's been totally reborn in a sense.
What Scott brought to ZAO, I think, was a darker aspect of music writing, actually. The riffs got sludgier and heavier and creepier, I guess is a good word to say.
A lot of the mood that is set in ZAO's songs always starts with Dan's lyrics, no matter what.
Dan has always been, in my opinion, the most profound lyric writer of our time.
Everybody in the band has a heartfelt attachment to playing music. We didn't want to be in the band because we wanted to be rock stars, but solely for, you know, playing music and playing live and doing the best that we could with something that we had.
I always love watching Russ on stage, doing his Frogger jumps. And
You know, the guy would jump up and land on his knees, and from what I hear, he's actually having some surgery now with his knees and, like, his leg.
There's just something about them live that was really, really awesome to watch.
ZAO was like the first band that got me into this kind of music.
You know, you kind of get, you know, the tingles up your spine when you listen to ZAO, because, like, it's real.
Nathaniel Greene was a general back in the late 1700s, in which Greensburg was named after. There was a cabin down below where Nathaniel, I think there was a war that happened here. Actually, I think this land was owned by the Masons. And no, I'm not kidding, because there's a lot of gravestones, just everywhere. And they're like, they're all old, and you can kind of see the dates and kind of can't. But there's actually a gravestone over there, actually the big one. I guess a whole bunch of Masons are buried here or something. I'm not kidding. This monument, erected in 1913 by members of the Masonic fraternity, resident in this vicinity, replaces and is a duplicate of a sandstone monument which was erected in 1832. This description on this panel alone accepted. Now this one right here, this part was erected over the bones of their departed brother by the members of the Masonic Society resident in this vicinity. So it's true. This land was owned by the Masons. Damn it.
We're here at Monroeville Mall, where the original Dawn of the Dead was filmed, the second installment of the Dead series. This was one of the first malls in the area, and when they decided to do Dawn of the Dead, they wanted to put it in a scenario, where they ended up in some sort of shelter, and they picked the mall. They picked good old Monroeville Mall. George Romero is from this area. The first 3 of the Dead installment are all filmed within an hour of here. Still the same light posts from the certain little things when you watch the movie. You can still pick out that are the same. Like the light poles are still the same, and the parking lot's still cracked and messed up. And behind us, there's a lot of woods, and I think it was a perfect location. A lot of those zombies were coming out of here, and this parking lot was once filled with hundreds and hundreds of the undead. And that mall right there is where the infamous, "When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth," spoken just a few hundred yards away from us. If you ask a lot of people, like our age, a lot of their parents were zombies, like just extras in the film. And I think part of my obsession with zombie films and such is being from here, because all the movies were filmed here in the background, and the culture has always been very engrossed with the horror genre. And about an hour from here, they filmed some RoboCop scenes too, I believe. A lot of the scenes were shot up, down, like shot on the roof, down into the parking lot and into the woods. And it's hard to tell a lot of the structure from the movie because it's different now, but still the same. Actually, I think there's a zombie. Oh, it's Russ. He's just being himself, I think, actually. You're 30 years late, buddy. 26.
Brains.
No brains. There's nothing in there.
This is my school when I grew up, first through third, and I had straight A's. And we sometimes when on the bus, we took a bus to the Catholic school, and they dropped us off there, and we had to take another bus to get to this school. On the first day of school, I missed my bus because I thought the Catholic school was my school. So I walked in, there's all these big kids, and they're looking at me, I'm looking at them. I'm like, where do I go? And some little girl says, or some lady teacher says to me, you better go out with the other kids in the front or you're gonna miss your bus.
Russ and I have the distinction of being in our first band together, which was a awful Metallica cover band. And we just, if Metallica ever heard any of the things that we were doing, I'm pretty sure that they would disavow their own songs. Without embarrassing him, from the first second of this comment, I should reveal how Russ and I first met. I had a band. It was actually my first band, way too many years ago to reveal, and our guitar player wanted to do nothing at practice except make out with my niece. So, as the leader of the band, we made the decision to get rid of that guy. So we needed another guitarist that knew his stuff, and our drummer said, "Well, there's this kid that lives on the same street as me, the world famous Bonita Drive in Greensburg." And so I said, all right, let's check this kid out, let's see what it is. So I drove down Bonita Drive with this guy, and we drove past this kid's house, and I guess this kid saw that his friend was in the passenger seat of my car and decided that it would be a real good idea to let me hit him with the car and to dive on the hood, and I just kept driving. So the first time that I ever laid eyes on Russ Cogdell, I hit him with my car, and that day he was in the band. So he knew every Metallica song off the first 5 records with all the solos, and didn't know anything else, but that was enough. So he was in.
I guess I met everybody. Originally a friend of mine, Drew. Neither of us either raised or ever being interested in religion. Both of us pretty much had a nervous breakdown at the same time. And my friend Drew, at the time, worked at a pizza shop, and he had a friend, that every day was like, hey, if you ever need help, you should go to this church I go to because, it's, just, he was like, it's a really good place, really positive and everything. And I was at a time where, I was trying to find something because I was feeling very suicidal, and I'd more or less had a full-blown nervous breakdown. So me and my friend Drew randomly went to this church called Word of Life. Actually, one of the first people I talked to was a guy named Bob Bigelow, and after getting to know him for a while, we started talking about how it would, it'd be fun to start a band or something. And he was like, well, I know this kid named Russ.
Bob Bigelow and Dan White actually approached me in church, and they asked me if I wanted to join this band that they were starting. I was like, that's cool. I didn't, know many people at the church, and I didn't really, give it another thought. I mean, that'd be amazing and whatnot. But I was like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, actually, he was holding an Unashamed CD the first time I'd met him. I was into Unashamed and stuff, and those early Tooth and Nail bands, Focused, and just everything. That whole scene was really, really cool. So that's kind of how we connected, and we started together.
We eventually got together, myself and Russ. Bob Bigelow at the time was playing drums, and our friend Jason, we got him to sing, and we had a couple really rough practices, and this kid Bob's basement of his parents' house, and they were gracious enough at the time to let us maybe practice for an hour or two at a time, during the evenings.
It was the worst thing ever. It was horrible, and it went through so many names and so many just so many horrible songs we'd written. But eventually, because that's actually how we got into bringing Steve in the band, and that's how basically our old band Seasons in the Field started.
Our drummer Bob Bigelow at the time started seeing this girl and suddenly started never being able to practice or anything. And me and Russ, we had practiced with this Bob for a while, and we wanted to keep what we had started going. So, Russ was like, well, there's this kid, Steve Peck, he's not doing anything right now, he's a good drummer, and we should go talk to him. So we went up to Davis Supermarket and talked to Steve Peck, the first time I ever met Steve Peck. And he was working there, I believe, as a bag boy. We ended up practicing at this church called the House of Faith, and it was a separate on a guy named Conrad. He lived in a house, and they had a driveway, and across the driveway, it looked like a giant barn. It looked like any barn you would ever see just driving down the road, but when you went inside, it looked like a Hyatt hotel. It was just beautiful, and it wasn't used a lot, and he let us practice there. He was really generous and supportive, and we eventually ended up recording a demo. The demo was actually recorded with myself, Russ, Steve, Jason Keener was the original vocalist, or the only vocalist, I guess, for that band. And actually on the original demo, Jeremiah Momper played guitar, and Jeremiah Momper was in the Juliana Theory for the first album or so. We went to this trailer, actually. This guy had a recording studio in his trailer, and we went there and recorded. The first time I'd ever been in a recording studio, went and recorded. The band was called Sower, and it was called Level Ground on Which to Stand. That was the first band, and then actually we broke up for a while, and we got back together, wanted to take it seriously. Took a lot of the songs, changed them, made them better, changed the name to Seasons in the Field, went to a place called Gamut Recordings, which had done bands like Passover, and a lot of a lot of local bands we respected, and we did the first Seasons in the Field recording.
Passover were kind of like the godfathers of our scene as far as just, what they had done. But then the bands that all of us were involved in were Pensive and Seasons in the Field.
My band played with, Pensive, like playing shows with them, and Scott's old bands and stuff. So it's just kind of like that little scene, that little community, just sort of everybody, if you didn't know people, then someone else knew someone. You just like knew everybody through association.
It was actually, it was really, really cool at the time because ourselves and Pensive, was Brett Detter from the Juliana Theory, pretty much was Chad Montague, the bass player. He was the vocalist. Brett played guitar. Josh Walters, the drummer of the Juliana Theory now, played drums. Marty Lund played bass.
Bugsy's Bagels is one of the places that I used to set up shows in the mid-90s. One ZAO show, I think, made it here. It was ZAO, Focal Point, Seasons in the Field, and Pensive, so it was kind of like all of us. I believe that was actually the last show that I ever booked here because the lady in charge made everyone sit on the ground, and we didn't think that was cool. So, but when it started out, she wasn't even going to charge anything at the door, so this was the perfect place for all of our bands to play at. And then she, just on a whim, decided to charge $1 at the door and give all the money to the bands, which was a great situation. And then she got real greedy and decided she wanted to charge $5 and $6 at the door and keep a lot of money for herself, and turned into a bad situation. But for a while, this was a really cool place for us to come, and all ages, of course. And yeah.
Good bagels.
Good bagels.
150 kids would show up, and we thought we were like on the top of the world. And we went to Cornerstone a couple times and tried to get on the impromptu stage and just hand out demos and things like that. But a lot of that was the early incarnation, I think, of being in bands and trying to just play music at the time. Definitely was like my life was that type of music, and that scene was pretty much, that's all I was into.
In high school, I was really good friends with Eric and Mick. They took me to a concert up here at the King's Place, which is about 2 miles away from my house. And at the time, I was just a regular heathen kid, didn't know any better. Wasn't a bad kid. It was a Christian rock band called Bride, and I didn't know any of the songs. I couldn't understand a word the guy was saying, and it was just loud guitars and drums, which I was used to, but it was just different because it was a different atmosphere. And the guy gave an altar call, which I didn't know what that was at the time. And I don't remember a word that he said. I think his name was Dale Thompson. Sounds familiar. All I knew was I just had to go up front, so I did. Eric and Mick took me up there, and I gave my heart to the Lord that night. And that was November of '92. Several months later, February of '93, I remember starting to play some music with Eric and Mick. Eric almost played guitar at the time, and he gave that up to sing. And Mick sort of played the bass, and we got together with a kid in the youth group that Eric knew named George Cordell. Really, the day that I would say ZAO formed is, it was probably in March or April of '93. And we were meeting at Jesse Smith's house because his dad had a 4-track recorder where 1 track didn't work, so it was a 3-track recorder. And we were going to record the 3 or 4 songs with George as a demo, and George didn't show up.
I went to this youth group. I was dating this girl or whatever. She invited me to go, and started getting involved with that. And every Thursday night we would have like a Bible study, and then they had this little like jam room in their basement. And I just started playing drums. And actually, this same week, I had rededicated my life to Christ or whatever. I bought my first drum set and just started playing. I could kind of just play.
Jesse, talked to us and said that he could learn the songs and sit in and play them. So we showed him the songs in about 45 minutes, and he sat down and recorded them. And I would say that's the day that ZAO officially started.
I remember, you know, doing it every Thursday for a month or so, and it being like just really looking forward to it. Like, it started to overpower how cool the Bible study was, and we were just like, whoa, this is awesome, you know, like we're totally like making weird music. And I was shocked personally that I could even do the stuff I was doing with the drums, because I didn't play, and I was just like weird. Like, Mick hadn't really played bass very long, and Eric just screamed, you know, but it was kind of like his little idea to be like, yeah, let's start a band, you know, like, and just getting really involved with the church again and stuff. You know, obviously I wasn't listening to secular music, because we all know that'll send you to hell. And so I was really into like the Crucified, but we were like, yeah, let's start like a hardcore thrash thing. And we just kept doing it, and then we started practicing outside. That was definitely like the incarnation of it. And then Eric came up with the name ZAO, and that was that. You know, when he decided to name the band ZAO, you know, I was just kind of like, I don't know, it was really cool, because there was like this innocence kind of thing. Like, I really wasn't thinking about what was cool and what was going to sound cool and who was going to think it was cool, because I mean, we were just so all about our relationship with the Lord, and you know, that was what was definitely coming first. This was just like a band. This wasn't, it was like something that was being incarnated. It wasn't like we didn't set out to start a band. It just kind of happened. So when he told me it, you know, I was like, well, what does that mean? We're all like, it's kind of weird. It just sounds weird, you know. It has this kind of cool, weird, whatever, I mean, thing to it. And he was like, yeah, it means alive in Greek. And I remember him trying to come up with like other names and stuff too, like more like dramatic, like blood of this or whatever, and we were just like, no, let's go with the short one, like no anything, just like whatever. So yeah, he's definitely the one that named it, you know, definitely for like, I'd say several months. Like, it was really like his vision, you know. Eric is definitely not credited enough in the history of ZAO for like it being like his brainchild, you know. It was definitely, you know, number one, let's start a band that is, you know, because in the beginning, I mean, we just sucked. It was awful, terrible. But, you know, it was like, let's be like a gnarly, like Christian band. I would go see like White Cross or Rez, and there was still this really like arena Hollywood edge to it. It was like, it was awesome, those bands. I'm not discrediting what those bands did. They're great bands, you know. And, especially, you know, bands like Deliverance and the Crucified, or really like Tourniquet, you know, like doing really extreme things. This was a big thing like in my heart when me and Eric really kind of started communicating and telling Roy and Mick, you know what, I was like, you know, it really bothers me how White Cross is the Christian Rat or Cinderella, and it bothers me how this is bad Master of Puppets, you know, or this and that. And I was like, let's try, you know, obviously it was a painful process, but let's like try to do something completely original, you know? I remember the first time I heard Unbroken, and it changed my life like forever. And then bands like A Mean Season. And it was hard for me, because those bands obviously being is like, I wanted to be so dedicated to my relationship with the Lord, and I knew that those kind of things would plant like certain seeds in your life and ideas, you know. I would show it to those guys and they'd be like, well, that's cool, you know, but wow, it's secular and it's this and that, you know. And those influences weren't allowed in ZAO because, you know, Eric just still to this day is such like a cornerstone of like faith. I mean, no one is going to take that away from him. A bad day at work isn't going to change the way he feels, or his wife and daughter getting mowed down by a machine gun. He's just like he's a crazy guy like that, you know. And Mick and Roy are just so laid back and so chill, you know. So I mean, really the influential aspect of the band came from me, because not to sound whatever, but I couldn't really feed her off of what was going on with the Christian music scene. And then Overcome and Focused came into the picture. And I remember meeting Tim from Focused for the first time and just being like, holy like these guys like they really don't give a damn. Like they are totally in love with the Lord and the idea of just being a real Christian, from the ministry aspect of it and the musical aspect of it. I mean, things have moved forward, you know, you listen to those records now, but I think for the kids that were involved at that time, it was like something crazy. You know, then came Strong Arm, you know, and all the bands even in between, you know, Inner Means, Overcome, like we all had this like thing. It was just different, you know. It was like just a different thing. After, you know, playing and stuff for a while, like we started, you know, wanting to play out or whatever. So we did this little demo, took some pictures in my parents' backyard, and recorded this little demo with this guy in Huntington. We bought these blank tapes and made them ourselves, you know, and we didn't have a Kinko's because we lived in a butthole town, so we made our own little covers and stuff. It was really interesting because even though Parkersburg was such a small place in West Virginia, we knew that like the scenes were happening around, you know, like with especially like New York. I mean, with Earth Crisis and Snapcase like really blowing up huge, and then with the bands out here, the Southern California bands, you know. But it was like, you know, we're from West Virginia. We all just got cars, you know, and so we set up our first show in Parkersburg and played with just all these terrible local bands. And I remember it being like, it was like everybody wanted to make fun of us, but they were like, whoa. Like, I mean, we sucked so bad, like miserably, just garbage. But we like felt so good about it. And it was just like, from the start, I remember just Eric, who's a pastor now, you know, just being like brutal, like, we're not ashamed. This band is, we're telling you that Jesus loves you, and we worship Jesus and we worship God, and that is that. This music is secondary. I hope you liked it, but this song is about this. And just all of us, I think, kind of, even kind of like me and Roy and Mick, I mean, I don't want to speak for them, you know, but I remember just being kind of taken back by it. Not like I was embarrassed, just like kind of like, oh, this is going to be an interesting ride, you know? The tone of the other bands that we were playing with was so anti-God. It was just funny to them, like entertainingly funny. Like I have old videos of us playing, and my buddy Alex Conley is in the back, who just a phenomenal musician, but you can just see this look of like, this is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. Just like some band of high school students, like just kind of getting into hardcore, not even understanding what it is, and just acting like complete apes, all in the name of Christ, you know?
When the band finally got something tangible in our hands, you know, and we had kind of branched out from just playing in our hometown to like, we would go so far away as Dayton or Cleveland. When we finally pressed that vinyl and it came out, Eric left.
When Eric decided to leave ZAO, it was pretty brutal because we were like super duper good friends. I mean, like on a spiritual level, like we were church friends, church buddies.
He made the decision to go to Bible college. And at the time, we had been playing in a side band where we all swapped instruments. I played drums and Jesse played guitar. And this kid that I didn't know by the name of Sean Jonas was the singer. He was a friend of Jesse's from school.
And Sean Jonas had been a friend of mine in grade school. We grew up in the same neighborhood, and had rabble-roused together, and he had just become a Christian. I remember Sean being at that last show and with Eric, and Eric like grabbed him and like pushed him into the crowd. And after this show, we had kind of been talking to Sean about like, hey, Eric's gonna leave, and Eric actually came to us 2 nights later and was like, that's the guy that's supposed to be your singer.
I went and did a few practices with him, and I didn't really realize that I could do it until we did our first show, and then we started just playing out with one another, and it actually worked out for the best.
Sean was very, very on fire for God, and so we knew that you know, as far as like at the time what we were doing, that was going to be a smooth transition as far as somebody being on the same page and wanting to say and convey the same ideals as far as like the message of the band.
The boldness from Earth Crisis and their frontman really inspired me to be more bold from the mic, because him being vegan and straight edge, and just how they were so militant and so inspired by that movement, and how he brought it across on stage inspired me to bring across vocally how I felt about Jesus and how I felt about God.
We need to stand up and fight for our Lord Jesus Christ, because we're not going to let it tear us up. We're not going to let it tear us apart. This first song, this goes out to God. This is God surrounds me. That's not the Holy Spirit. and get freedom with Christ. Get freedom with the Lord.
The way a hardcore scene was set up at the time is that you spoke from your heart. You spoke what you were about and what you stood for, and we were all about that, and we used that to its fullest capacity, you know. And whenever we would go out, I would speak whatever was on my heart that night, and because of that, we got the label as being a Christian band, and that wasn't our true intention. Our true intention was just to play music and have a good time, but because of our deep-rooted relationship with God, it always came across very powerful, and God used it. I mean, we were able to touch a lot of people's lives, and it was awesome.
Jesus Christ is very simple. Very simple. There's a plan for each and every life in here. A plan. It's just to be with Jesus. And all you have to do is just very simple. It's just believe in your heart. Just believe in your heart. And confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord. And invite him into your life.
I think we had toured maybe once. I mean, things were so hard on that level for us as a band because, first of all, everybody hated us because we were Christian. Second of all, we were really weird musically. And I don't know, it was just like everything was, I remember we played our first big show with Chokehold and Snapcase, and I remember like 400 kids being there at the Canton Y and them giving us $8. And me and Eric it was right before Sean, you know, I know we replaced him or whatever, but me and Eric and Roy and Mick sleeping on a barn floor in February.
We recorded the album All Else Failed in a studio called Spider Studios.
We did it with Ben Schnigel or something, I think.
We knew some of the recordings that were coming out of there at the time. The guy, Ben, actually worked with bands like Integrity.
He just, you know, he does all the Chimera albums, and he just did the new Disturbed.
We pull into this driveway. It was in basically a neighborhood.
Just this little whole studio, awesome, but just little garage.
It says Spider Studios on this garage. So we go, and it's actually in a garage. So we walk in, and his setup was actually pretty sweet. He had a little, you know, chill out area, and then he had the studio.
Sean was doing a vocal take, and I think the song was In Loving Kindness. At the end, there's this like really long scream. Well, Ben gets up, and like Sean starts screaming on this part, and Ben goes and gets a soda, and when he comes back, Sean's still screaming. And he was like, what the heck? You've been that same yell for like 30 seconds.
Ben had set up to his soundboard. He had his soundboard hooked up to a television out in the waiting room. And whenever we needed a clip for like a sound effect or anything, he would hit a button which would cue the TV up, and whatever channel was on, he'd get like a little quick clip or a phrase for somebody. And I remember one of the significant endings to the album is I'm weak now, I'm getting sick of this place. It was something that was said. It was a quick clip, and we didn't know where that came from, and we went out to the waiting room where his TV was, and it came from the TV show The Simpsons, or the cartoon The Simpsons, and we were just like, oh man, that's crazy, but it worked. It was pretty significant.
Looking back, I always wonder, how did we do that? Because we had 3 days to record, mix, and like finalize. The drums sounded okay, the guitar sounded okay. I know every time I palm muted or crunched, you could hear the springs jangling inside my guitar. The bass sounded okay. We did it in a rush, man, but it just kind of came out magic.
You know, I'm definitely, by this point, full on in the scene, listening to, you know, whatever I want without conviction, and everybody else is still kind of in their own youth group world. Not that that's bad, you know, but that was when right about when All Else Failed came out and we came to California for the first time. That was when I was like, okay, this is on, something's going on. It's gonna, you know, going down.
The first person I ever met in ZAO was Jesse. And at that time, with me being in a different band, we played a show with them. I think it was in Ohio. And he came up to me, like, approached us. He seemed very genuine, really cool, really, really nice. And like there to like help you out. We like asked him, because at the time I wasn't in a Christian band. And we asked, like, is this a Christian show? And he's like, dude, it's all cool, man. We'll just play. It'll be fun. But that's kind of how I met anybody first, was Jesse. They seemed just kind of like a generic Earth crisis. At the same time, like, that was kind of what was going on at the time. And it was cool to see that. But I was definitely not into that style of music or anything. But the guys seemed really cool.
My first exposure to the original ZAO lineup would have been, I had started booking shows at a local club called Illusions, which Scott also had set up some shows. I kind of like took over where Scott left off. Scott had kind of quit doing them. We were basically looking for, you know, at the time we were all in pretty heavy Christian bands, and, you know, really involved in the church, and we were looking for more bands in general, but we were mainly looking for other Christian-based bands for us to play with, you know, heavy bands and things. And, you know, it's very obvious with the original lineup of ZAO, you know, what they were and, you know, what they were all about. So Jack gave me a number for one of them, and probably Jesse, but I don't remember at this point. And I called them, and yeah, they came up to Greensburg. I don't remember the date, but I could find it. And they came up, and we met them at the good old Greensburg Eaton Park. And I think it was myself and the guys in my band at the time, Pensive. It was Brett, Chad, Josh Walters, and I think a couple of the Seasons guys too.
At the time, we really weren't even familiar with their music. I remember, I believe someone just had recommended that, you know, we get a hold of them to have them play this show. And none of us had ever even heard them yet.
But we showed up at Eaton Park and got some food, and then took them straight to Illusions. And, you know, we kind of wanted to show that we were, you know, the big boys on the block, so we set up some sound checks at Illusions, which was an absolute rarity, if not, you know, never done. And, you know, we sound checked what we thought were our best songs, trying to impress these out-of-town guys. And then, you know, naturally we let them come up and do their sound check, and they thoroughly blew all of the Greensburg bands off the stage.
And they just started playing these like really heavy riffs, and, you know, at the time, as far as drumming, you know, Jesse Smith was, you know, probably one of the most, he stood out more than anybody, I guess, at the time. And you know, he started playing and they started playing, and Sean Jonas let out this like 30-second belt, and I was just kind of in awe at the time.
It was just something completely different, and the vocals were emotional, the lyrics were, they're very heartfelt lyrics.
If you have a desire in your heart, this is your time to lift up your hands and praise God. Let Him know. Let Him know what your hurts, about your pain, about your frustration. This world is not to. It's time to praise God. Glorify Him for what is worth and nothing less. Let's give Him praise.
We were just annihilated with how good they were. So we didn't realize how far behind we were. So that was my first encounter with the original lineup of ZAO.
Tooth and Nail Records was it, you know, at the moment, as far as being a Christian band.
We liked a lot of the bands that were on there. It was new and it was different.
So we were busting our butts just trying to get noticed by Tooth and Nail. And
I don't think Sean, Mick, or Roy know this, but I made a tape before we even did All Else Failed, with my voice speaking to Brandon Ebel, with songs we'd recorded that were going to be on All Else Failed, and then a handwritten letter and some photos, and sent it to him. I never heard anything back or whatever. But that was like right when Brandon released Wish for Eden's first record, Tooth and Nail, 0001.
I remember we sent demos to Tooth and Nail quite a few times, and they just they really weren't into us, and so we had to go with Steadfast Records for our first album to get noticed. I remember at Cornerstone 96, we gave our demo, or not our demo, but our full CD to the A&R person at Tooth and Nail Records, Bill Powers.
We were on tour. I had heard somebody was up at the Tooth and Nail offices, and he had caught wind, that we had sold, 5,000 albums with no ads, and we're touring by ourselves, fully a machine, touring in a brand new Toyota Tercel, pulling a trailer.
I remember Jesse Smith and Brandon talked a good bit back and forth on the phone, and those were exciting times. And then I remember they invited us out to Seattle, and we sat down with them at a Mongolian barbecue, and just kind of went over, contracts and negotiations a little bit. And really, there was no negotiation. It was like, you tell us what we can do to get on your label, and we'll do it. And we signed one of the most awful contracts ever. It was like 5 albums.
I just remember looking at this thing, and man, it was thick, and I didn't understand a word in it. And, I'm sharp enough that I can read and retain what it says, but it was just in all this lawyerly language. And we looked it over and didn't want to pay money to have a lawyer look at it, and we just said, what the heck, we're not going to get rich off of it. So we all signed it and sent it back.
But I mean, that's just what you get when you're young and dumb and excited. But Tooth and Nail Records was a great move for us. They gave us a lot of exposure and just what we needed to get bigger. So yeah, it was a good move.
Those guys were like so stoked. I was just kind of like, I had this, by that point I had started getting a little bit of a different vision for the band. It was definitely like fully Christ-centered still, but that was for the seed of the Jesse Smith seed in ZAO. That was when I knew no matter what happened with anybody else that I wasn't going to stop. We got signed to Tooth and Nail, and very shortly after went in to do Splinter Shards.
We would never show up to a practice and say, here's a song, I want you guys to learn it. It would always be, here's a guitar riff, or Jesse would say, here's some drums I'm working on, or Mick would say, here's some bass, and we would like integrate.
A lot of people were pissed that we put the same songs on there and stuff, different renditions and stuff, but we wanted a Tooth and Nail record out quick because of what was going on with like the scene, the hardcore scene, especially like the Christian scene that was starting to grow. And I mean, for a long time, that scene only did exist on the West Coast. That was a West Coast thing. I mean, focused, playing shows to 2,000 people. I mean, that was not happening everywhere else. Christian hardcore bands, primarily, if they were playing together, were playing youth groups.
First encounter with ZAO was when Focal Point was in the studio in LA, in Burbank, doing our first and only record. A few months before that, we had got All Else Failed CD, and totally stoked on it. Like, whoa, what's this band? Where are they from? Like, just totally stoked on the sound. We were in the studio doing the record, and this show was coming up, this tour, and it was ZAO, Strong Arm, Bloodshed, Shai Hulud. We tried to find out who was putting this show on. Like, can we get on that? We had all our gear down there. We were like practiced up and everything. We were kind of like a newer Tooth and Nail at the time band, and we were like, we've got to get on this show. Those were like some of our favorite bands that were on the label and stuff like that. We'd never played with any of them. So we were like, we've got to get on that show. So we found out who was promoting it, and luckily enough, we got on the show. What I remember the most about was meeting the guys in ZAO, specifically how crazy of a drummer that Jesse was and how fun he was to watch, and how much power Sean Jonas had when he sang, and how like kind of effortless he was when he screamed, and like how long he could hold notes, and just standing there, like basically looking like he was talking to the microphone.
after Splinter, I started letting the dudes in the band know, like, look, this church stuff is cool, you know, but we already go to church and we already love the Lord. And if you want to minister and stuff, like, you know, obviously on that level, you know, you have to be playing to secular audience just on a level, period, you know.
I think we went through periods of time where all of us were best friends with other people in the band. I can't speak for the other guys, but I know there were times when I was closer to Sean than anyone else, and that probably comprised the majority of the time. I was closer to Sean. I was always very close to Mick. Both of them have a very open personality. Even now, I cannot see them or talk to them for months, and when I see them, we're cool, right? There was a long period of time, months, where I was probably closer to Jesse than I was anyone else.
There was no breakdown in like communication between me and Roy and Sean, but I started kind of feeling like, you know, I am a Christian. You know, our parents go to work every day, you know, and they are computer techs, they are plumbers, they are teachers. You know, I don't see people in my life that I've respected and just have lived lives of like just true moral glory and achieved real happiness be like, hey, Ryan, nice to meet you. I'm Susie, and I'm a Christian teacher. And I started getting really annoyed with that, you know? I was like, I'm not trying to be a jerk. It started to bother me, like, okay, you're Roy, you're Mick, you're Sean, everyone knows you're a Christian. That is what you are. Like, what are we as a band? Where are we musically? And I wouldn't necessarily call it like any bitterness or weirdness yet, but kind of it started to bother me.
There are two types of people in the world. There are those who I think are easy to get along with, and those who can be sort of difficult to get along with. And it doesn't necessarily reflect greater on one and worse on the other, but there are lots of people in my life who I cannot see them for a long period of time, and when I see them, we just pick up where we left off. And then there are people, and I'm sure everyone can associate with this, where you haven't seen someone for a while, and when you come back in contact with them, there's some tension there, some unspoken tension, and it can just be difficult to even put your finger on why it's there, but you always feel like you have to make up with them, or there's something that you need to apologize for, or you need to walk on eggshells around them until you get that relationship right. And I think a lot of us felt that with Jesse. After some shows, you know, it would just kind of be like Jesse and the rest of us. Not to say that he was a difficult person in general. I think he was really gifted, and I think he was really driven, and I think he had some really specific ideas and some maybe far-seeing vision compared to what we did. And maybe the difficulty that we felt in getting along with him, and maybe all the little fires that came up that we had to put out, I think probably a lot of those stemmed from us just not being on the same page as him. Sure, you know, a lot of them were probably differences that we just had between personalities. Jesse was very quick to speak and, you know, very outgoing, and I was very reserved. I think Sean, I think the rest of us were just really kind of quiet and reserved, and, you know, different upbringing. A lot of conflicting ideas. When we played music, we flowed and we got along great, but man, hanging out a lot of times, we had some difficulties.
We did a show with Living Sacrifice, and it was at this church, and the pastor there wanted to pray for me, and he wanted to pray for the other members of the other bands and stuff, and it was a really awesome time. It was like really good time in prayer, and we got prayed over, and afterwards I just felt something different was happening on the inside of me, and I knew one of the significant things in my life being the band was changing. Something was changing there, and I knew it was pretty much my time to wrap things up with the band. I just hadn't told anyone. Well, the crazy thing about it is that at the exact same time, Roy was feeling the same thing, and we both felt a strong calling to ministry. And Mick had already left the band, and so he was a pretty significant part because we all grew so close together, and he left and things were just not the same after he left. It got way more serious. It became more about money and less about ministry, and that kind of dampened things a little bit. But I just knew on that trip that I was being pulled away a little bit.
Right before they left the band, there was, I started being like, you don't have to talk about the Lord every night. You're pissing certain people off. You don't have to shove this down their throat. Well, it's ministry. That's what we are. Yeah, and I would combat it with like, yeah, but the Holy Spirit like does His own thing, and you can't, you can't force a vegan to eat a hamburger or a steak lover to be vegan. You can't force a drug addict just to kick his habit. Like I hate it to this day. I hated it in Bible college. I hate it now. Like, God is His own person, and the way He moves in people is His own deal. And if you have a problem with that as a Christian, you need to read your fucking Bible. It's like, and I started feeling like we were pushing a product. Jesus. How can you push Jesus on people? It's the coolest thing that could ever happen to someone. How are you going to sell it like a Nike tennis shoe,
We got back from the tour, and I talked to Roy, and he told me how he felt, and I told him how I felt. And I remember our next practice, we just broke the news to everyone, and it was not a pretty sight.
I knew it. I knew inside. I mean, I wasn't dumb. I was in my Bible too. I was in, my own life, and I knew they were going to leave. And I knew Sean was to the point where he had said something about God telling him that he needed to do something else, and I knew then that it was going to be me. I knew Roy and Mick were going to leave, and I remember it like it was yesterday. We went out to Mick's house, or Roy's house, his parents, and they all told me, and they were like, don't be mad, and I was like, it's cool, but I'm going to keep the band going. I'm going to find new people.
We were all ZAO fans, first and foremost. We were there when the first record came out at Cornerstone, and they opened the first box, at Cornerstone, and we took copies out of that, and we were ZAO fans first and foremost, the whole way through, that record, and then when the Splinter Shards came out and they got the Tooth and Nail deal, we were all fans, happy for them. Like it was one of those things, and we were kind of stoked to be included, in that scene at the time.
So when everyone quit, I believe prior to that they had possibly asked Brett Detter to be their second guitar player. And this is when, ourselves and Scenes in the Field and Pensive has been playing a lot with ZAO. So by then we were all, at least acquaintances by any means.
ZAO was pretty much my favorite band at the time. Definitely my favorite hardcore band. And I just remember at one point, I worked today at a laundromat, cleaning a laundromat, and I was playing in Pensive, and I think just started the Juliana Theory maybe. None of my bands were full-time, and I really just wanted to tour, but other people in my band like couldn't tour and stuff, and I remember I called Jesse one night while I was working at the laundromat, and I was like, Jesse, if Roy ever decides to quit, or if anything ever happens, give me a call, because I'd love to play guitar for the band. A couple months later, Jesse called me up and was like, hey, Roy's gonna do like one last tour, and after that we want you to join the band.
Ron Gray was in the band too by this time, and shortly after he had left, he was kind of like a middle guy. Kevin Moran was playing for Mick.
It was still the remains of the lineup before me, which was basically, I remember Mick played his last show, and it was in Pittsburgh. I was at that show. They played with Earth Crisis and VOD, and I remember that was Mick's last show, and they got Kevin to replace him, and then they got Ron. He was playing second guitar to make up for all Roy's overdubs and everything else. And when Jesse asked me to join the band, Sean was still going to be in the band. It wasn't expected, at least to my knowledge, if I'm remembering correctly. Sean was supposed to still be in the band, and it was just basically I was going to replace Roy. It was still going to be Kevin, and it was still going to be Ron, and it was still going to be Jesse, and it was going to be me.
I knew as soon as Brett was on board, I mean, he had the same dream that I did. There was nothing to stop Brett. I mean, obviously the Juliana Theory has had their times of success, you know, and they're still freaking doing it, you know. You know, before Scott came in and stuff, you know, Brett was very, like, just so proactive. Like, he had the dream, you know, like, and I admired that about him. And he was like, let's do this, you know, down to the gear, like, you know, caring about his equipment. I started driving up to Greensburg every week, 220 miles every week for, you know, as many years as I did that. And we were practicing at Brett's house.
When Jesse came to Greensburg for the first time to practice, because he didn't really have a place to practice in West Virginia, so he came and Kevin came with him, and we practiced in my parents' basement. Basically, Ron didn't show up, and it was just me, Kevin, and Jesse, and we didn't have a singer, so we tried out this one guy, Brad, who flew up.
He came from Denver, Colorado. He had moved with his now ex-wife out to Canton, and he was going to Colorado, and he came, and he was awesome. It was so awesome, but he was awesome like Sean, and like awesome like, wow, cool voice. I mean, I remember being so tripped out. I'm like playing the songs, and me and Brett are like kind of looking at each other, and the dude was like getting in my face and stuff, and I was just like, whoa, like a little weird, like a little too, like I think me and Brett kind of, and Kevin definitely kind of, you know, I knew kind of being the leader guy or whatever at the time, like this kind of get away from this real evangelical like thing, and if it's starting new, it's the season in a band. Let's take the opportunity and let's go with it.
Basically, Dan was one of my best friends, and I remember Dan used to do backing vocals for his band Seasons in the Field, and nobody might tell you this, and he might not tell you this, but Dan's screaming wasn't very good back then, and when he was doing backing vocals, and he didn't sound very good, and nothing like the influential, huge like voice that he has today, and has had since, you know, early on in the band. But he hadn't found his voice yet, that's all. He just hadn't found it. And I remember being like talking to Dan one day when we were working on Seasons in the Field Pensive Split CD, and we were at the studio in Latrobe, and I remember telling Dan, like, I really want to try to get you to sing for ZAO. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I think you'd be awesome for the band. And I was like, I want to talk to Jesse about it. And so I remember I just told Jesse, I was like, you know, I think we should try out Dan. And Jesse knew Dan, he, you know, a little bit at least from hanging out with him when he came to Greensburg and whatnot.
What did I think of Dan the first time I met him? I thought he was a freaking nut job, because I asked him to go to Denny's with me. I just met Chad Montague, that's now on the Juliana Theory, Marty Lund, that's now ZAO's bass player, Brett, Russ, and we all met because they were in Sower, and Brett was in Pensive. And the first time I met him was when Sean was still in the band, and I was like, dude, you want to go to Denny's after the show? And he's like, I don't know, I think I need to pray about it. And I was just like, whoa, like, cool, dude. I need to buy one roll of toilet paper too. And it was awesome. Like, it was so genuine, and I'm not even making light of it. Like, Dan Wyatt is a freaking beautiful character.
Dan was gonna come to practice, and he called up and was like, I'm gonna come, but I'm gonna bring Russ with me. And it was it's ironic, and it was kind of like the same thing where Marty was like, yeah, I'll come join your band, Red Number 9, if I can bring Russ. And it was the same type of thing. And fortunately, thank God, we said yes, and we weren't stupid about that, because Russ was, you know, phenomenal guitar player and songwriter and showman and everything else.
I pretty much, at the time, Russ was full-blown, just like my best friend. Spent pretty much every day together, non-stop, just hanging out and doing whatever. And actually, at the time, I told him that I wouldn't be in the band unless Russ was allowed to be in the band, because to me, you know, his friendship was worth more than doing, you know, some band.
Me and Dan, we had actually gone to Bible school in our area, and we kind of wanted to transfer to a school called Elam Bible Institute in New York. And literally a week before we were, about to go up to the school and move in and start, taking classes and stuff, he had the conversation with Brett and Jesse, and then he called me, and I talked to Dan. I was like, what's up? He told me he had something, some crazy news that, could make or break our lives, kind of like a radical change. But he was like, how would you feel if, you were the guitarist for ZAO? And I was just like, I remember it too, because I was at my parents' house and I was just lying on the bed watching TV.
I remember trying out, and it was a little strange at the time because my personal influences vocally, I guess, weren't what was necessarily being heard at the time.
His voice, was very, very, very different. We were super into Carcass. I was always about it, honestly, I don't really care what people think, so I don't think it was ever a concern to me. I definitely didn't give a rip what the label thought, because I knew it was going to be huge, and I knew for the first time ever in anything I'd done musically that it was actually going to make an impact.
I don't think anybody knew what laid in store, and but at the time I was pretty much was more worried about my friends and what I thought was right than just being able to get in this band. And I guess in the end my convictions were right, because I think Russ is added a lot of what became the defining sound of the band. And I don't know if maybe it was some strange, but just something in me just refused. I just didn't, to me it wasn't of any interest if Russ wasn't going to be part of it.
I don't think we were, we were meant to be in ZAO to imitate, what exactly the old ZAO had done in the past, but just to bring out what could be done, and we did as best as we could, and I think we did all right.
Russ and I matched extremely well guitar-wise. There were things that he was way better at than I am, and maybe one or two things that I did better than him, not too many, but I think our style went really well together. And basically, yeah, Dan gets all the credit for bringing Russ. Fortunately, I always said I think the biggest thing I ever contributed to ZAO was bringing Dan to the band, because he is ZAO, at least in my mind at this point. So
I remember the first practices. They were in Brett Detter's basement, and I remember vaguely writing a lot of the early songs.
Kevin was supposed to go on tour with us, and pretty much at the last minute he was like, I got this job, I can't come on tour. And that's when we decided at the last second that we were going to go out on tour as a four-piece with no bass player, which we were kind of nervous about, but ended up working for a while, I guess.
The ZAO that we were stepping into the shoes of, as far as myself and Russ and Brett, was a very strong ministry-oriented band. I remember feeling that I didn't want to write like Sean wrote just to make people happy. That I was trying to do something that came from, my emotions and my heart and my thoughts. And I remember all of us, it was a big step. As far as looking back, the first album we wrote was Blood and Fire, that being probably the most spiritual album, even at the time, didn't really measure up to the spirituality of, say, like Splinter Shards versus Separation.
ZAO, to me, no offense to Sean, no offense to Roy, no offense to Mick, it is a different band. That band, that incarnation, of ZAO is a different thing. I don't think the name should have changed, because that it was my dream while we were doing that, and it was their dream, and then it moved over, and it was me by myself, and then these new guys came in, you know what I mean? What ZAO was always to me was Blood and Fire.
And I just remember a lot of us being like, we're just gonna make this how we want it, and if it crashes and burns, it crashes and burns. At least, you know, I got to say I was in ZAO. I think what really shaped a lot of that era was you had these kids in Christian bands that knew they weren't accepted, and they just wanted to make the best music and the biggest impact that they could, because that was the only way to get any recognition. And I remember when we had originally joined, right around the time we were joining ZAO, I would say probably one of my biggest influences in Christian music was a band called Overcome. And when they would play, both their guitar players were full-blown rockabilly, you know, white t-shirt, jeans pegged up at the bottom, Converse All-Stars, you know, Murray's wax, thick pompadours, you know, and just, I remember seeing that and being like, these people are doing what they care about, and they're, you know, just enjoying themselves, and they don't really care what people think. And at the time, definitely, you know, with like Earth Christ and Snapcase, that's when like basketball jerseys, like a lot of like the oversized clothes, excessive amounts of beads and chokers and things like that. And which was definitely, there was a lot of bands at the time in the scene that were doing the same. But I remember being drawn to bands like Overcome, you know, because they were, in my opinion, the best of the Christian, you know, heavier music, and they just had a totally different style, a totally different sound. As I first joined ZAO and began, you know, writing and recording and hanging out, a lot of new things were opened up to me, and I felt that it was more me than wearing like chokers and baggy clothes.
We were just excited. I know me and Russ and Dan were just excited that we were in ZAO, because it was one of our favorite bands, and we knew that it didn't sound. We knew that it sounded a lot different, and we were into this other band a ton as well. It probably tied for my favorite band, this band called Passover that never got big.
Passover was the singer's named Jack Wright, a bass player named Jim Ventosa, Brad Heipel was the guitar player, and the drummer's name was Mike. I'm not sure of his last name, but they were all from Greensburg at the time, and they were just not only phenomenally like visually live as far as like presence, but musically to this day still some of the best thing, you know, I've ever heard.
Dan's biggest influence on his vocals was Jack from Passover, and we were always like, yeah, we're gonna bring this Pennsylvania thing to ZAO, this Pennsylvania metalcore thing.
The people that we looked up to, you know, in these bands like Passover and Abnegation and Puritan, we wanted to take those elements.
We're all from this small town, but we have all these amazing bands around to influence us that a lot of these other people that are hearing us have never heard. As far as originality and Blood and Fire, ZAO being original, we necessarily weren't being original. We were just influenced by this small circle of bands that no one else had heard. And we were the first band to take from their style, not necessarily exactly, but take elements of their style, record it, and actually be heard. We were just, you know, lucky enough to have an outlet where a lot of people would get to hear our music. The first ZAO show we ever played, I believe, it was in the upstairs of a YMCA school type of building. Back then, a good show was, you know, you didn't have even the drums or guitars or bass mic'd. You just turned up and had a PA for vocals and you went with that, you know, and a lot of the shows weren't even in necessarily, at least, you know, as far as like, especially the Christian bands, weren't really ever in like real venues, at least, you know, on the East Coast and things like that. You know, you would be stoked to go to a YMCA or, you know, rent out the gym of a school or something. You know, you would just have to sit back and everyone level out their guitar and the bass and the drums. Pretty much the vocals would run through a PA and that was about it. You were happy if 150 kids showed up.
I remember the first couple shows pretty well. We were doing about half and half old songs. We were doing Surrounds Me, we were doing Exchange, we were doing Repressed, we were doing, I forget, a couple more old ones, and then about half of Blood and Fire. And the very first show, I believe both the first two shows were in Indiana. The crowd reaction was mind-numbing. We were floored by how people reacted to us, and we were really nervous going in and being ZAO. ZAO had 2 albums out and had, you know, a bunch of songs that people knew and had a fan base, and it was like, okay, hi, we're ZAO, you don't know 3 of us, you don't know the lead singer, and there's one guy on drums that you know. And we were really nervous that people weren't going to like it, but that reaction that we got at that second show, so many people came up to us and were like, the new stuff's amazing, you guys sound better than the old band, we don't even care that you didn't have a bass player. And that reaction just kind of continued. And that, I was really floored by that, because I don't think we knew that, you know, that it would be like that.
The first show is still kind of hazy to me, but the second show was memorable. I believe Russ drop kicked me in the face that show because a lot of on-stage violence was a big part of influence at the time.
Jesse broke his double bass pedal, and we only got to play like 6 songs, and Dan threw up on stage.
Throwing up, beating the crap out of each other. You get on stage and you're like, I'm gonna hurt myself and other people, and just like kind of spaz out and release everything that, you know, inside of me that's negative by completely making a psychopath of myself. A lot of us had carried things throughout our lives. We all had baggage, you know, the albatross around the neck, and that was our chance to try to be apart from it once again for 30 to 40 minutes. I could honestly say that I know like a couple people personally, like I said, we did it because we know, you know, people might be attracted to it, but I would say that it wasn't done just for theatrics by any means. It definitely was, you know, that was definitely a very true sort of anger and rage, and, you know, I guess that's what always has drawn me to this type of music is, and, you know, instead of having to go and sit with a psychiatrist or, you know, taking it out on other people or your friends or, you know, wanting to fight and things, like this was, you would take everything in your life that hurt you, everything in your life that you hated, and you would have 30 or 40 minutes to try to more or less vomit it out onto the crowd. As far as just, I guess it was strange. That was, I guess, part of one of my old rituals is I would kind of gather up everything that I hated, and that was my stage to try to feel better or not think about it, or, you know, my mother would probably have been worried at the time if I was in my room screaming at the walls and breaking things. But if you do it in front of a crowd with a microphone, all of a sudden it's interesting, you know, and I guess it seemed to be the logical approach to therapy, in a sense. Right prior to recording Blood and Fire is probably one of the craziest times I've ever went through in my life. I was in between 11th and 12th grade. I had a nervous breakdown 3 days after 11th grade let out. It was actually, I went, got my senior pictures taken to be in the yearbook for 12th grade, and about 4 hours later is when 4 hours later is when I had probably the worst experience of my life. And prior to that, my stepbrother, well, the whole story is I call him my stepbrother, but he was never technically my stepbrother at the time. My mom dated after she had divorced my father, had dated a man they dated for 13 years until they were married. But he was my stepdad. We lived with him, never called him dad or anything, but he was the father figure. They were together for a long time. And his son, who I'd never met, when my mother first started dating, we'd moved in. We lived in a really bad area, moved in. And after a couple months, his son had more or less had to leave the state of California because, he wasn't even 18 and he had all kinds of criminal problems, we'll say. But I met him. I mean, this could be a whole other story, but he is the one that, he taught me my first song on guitar. He listened to music. He introduced me to heavy music. He was in a band when I was young. They played little shows. They were kind of I would say King Diamond-esque type of just metal. And I remember seeing a show with 15 people there and being like, this is so amazing. But he died in a car accident very suddenly. And it wasn't something we were really allowed to talk about in my house because of issues with him and his father. His father feeling that he didn't do a proper job of raising him, and feeling that now that he was gone, kind of looking back and saying, I totally screwed up, with my son, and now he's gone and there's nothing I can do. And we didn't talk about it, It was just something you didn't talk about because he didn't know how to deal with it and he would get upset. And a lot of the early, the first time I ever was writing poems and stuff, what had to do with I would sit around and think about the last time I ever saw my brother and what we talked about. And, I remember what he was wearing, and I remember, the weather that day, and it's one of the clearest memories I have, probably, is the last time I saw him. And, he died, and it was a total mess. He not only did he die, but the passenger in the car died, who was a good friend of mine who had actually failed a couple grades and was a year ahead of me, but totally stuck up for me in middle school. And every time, someone would want to beat my ass, he was there for me. So not only did my brother die, but this person that had been a big impact in my life died. The person that died with my brother's cousin committed suicide after they died because he just couldn't take it. I mean, these were really just good people. They were burnouts, is what people used to call them. Just that's what they used to call metalheads. Just call them burnouts, He's half the reason I'm here, And then we were writing, I had a lot of that to deal with, and we were actually writing the song. Well, I wasn't writing, but Russ and Brett and Jesse were writing the actual music to what ended up becoming To Think of You. And we were practicing at this barn, which was a church, and the phone rang, and it was my mom, and she was crying, and I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that, my brother's best friend, who I had grown up with, he lived about a block away. He was like my other little brother, kind of, and that as we had grown up, he had an issue with a girl, and he committed suicide on his front porch. And my mom calls and tells me this while we're, they're writing a song, and I'm just sitting there kind of flipping through lyrics and poems, and, you know, trying to find maybe something to put to this song that, you know, musically was to think of you at the time. And, you know, I get this call and she's like, you know, I just got to tell you that, you know, Robbie killed himself today. And literally the lyrics to Think of You took me about 4 minutes to write. It was like literally, that song is instantly what I felt at the time. It was pretty much like my hand could barely keep up with what my thoughts were. It's like, and this is just within a few years, like I have a nervous breakdown. I lose my stepbrother. You know, my little brother's best friend who I've grown up with kills himself. I had another friend named Ben, Ben Cromer, probably one of the best people I ever knew, was accidentally shot and killed with a hunting rifle that they thought was not loaded. And, you know, my friend, a good friend of mine at the time named John, held him while I died. And this is what I'm going into this band with. And I kind of grew up in a place where you necessarily couldn't sit down at dinner and talk about these things. So I brought them, you know, to the stage. And what I believe what began defining us at Blood and Fire is I had come not too far before that to believe in Christianity. This is right after my friends are dead and my friends are still dying. And my whole message is not necessarily with the old ZAO where they would more or less boil down to believe in God, believe in Jesus. My message was this belief that I have is the only reason that I'm not dead like the rest of my friends, because there's parts of me that don't want to be alive. And the only thing that is keeping me alive is my belief in God. And that's what I had to share, not just believe in God, but believe in God because I never, you know, there's no promise your life is better. There's no promise that, you know, people you care about aren't going to pass away. There's no promise that horrible things aren't going to happen. But I believe in God because that's the only reason I ever made it through that period of my life. And I believe that was the new message at the time, was not just believe in God, but I believe in God and this is what has happened to me. And I'm not just some kid who, you know, was raised, some pastor's kid who's had a perfect life and I'm up here telling people to believe in God. I'm saying that my entire life, even before people I care about passing away, has been really not that good. And that I found a reason to live and a reason, you know, to do anything in my, you know, my beliefs in, you know, in Christianity, Christ. And that's what I wanted to push, was this isn't just a bunch of people up here telling you what to do. This is someone trying to offer a solution to you, and that I hurt, and that it's not easy, you know. I'm not necessarily the type of person that walks around with a smile all the time, but I still think there's reason, you know, a reason to be positive and a reason to push forward, and that there's nothing wrong with being hurt. There's nothing wrong with, you know, depression and things like that. They're natural. Like, don't let people tell you you're a freak because you're depressed or you're hurt. And my mother was awesome, but besides that, I had nobody to turn to. No one ever, you know, to talk to about anything. And, you know, I wasn't raised on any religions or anything, but for me, the first time as I experienced, you know, my Christian experience, that was my reason to stay around, you know. And, you know, I became a Christian the day that I more or less was going to, you know, I completely planned my suicide. And, you know, we had a car that was parked in a garage on the side of the house. And I knew that simply with a few towels under the door and a full tank of gas that I could end my life, you know. And, you know, if that didn't work, you know, I could get a hold of a gun or something, that there was a way to, you know. And it wasn't a cry for help. I never told anybody, hey, I want to kill myself. It was, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to kill myself and get it over with. And I don't want to tell anybody because I don't want anybody to stop me. Because this isn't a cry for help. This is, I just want to die, you know? And I took all of those feelings with me instead.
Writing Blood and Fire, something that I definitely remember bits and pieces of it really well. We wrote the entire record in my parents' basement of their old house, in 2 different rooms in the basement. We also wrote a little bit in this church called the Barn. It was very collaborative. Everybody had ideas. Everybody had parts. You know, Jesse would have random guitar parts. I remember Russ coming up with drum things, and you know, it was very much everybody together, you know, doing their thing and working together. It was great. I remember Russ coming over to my parents' house, and he and I just sat on the floor and jammed on guitar for a long time, and he started playing the beginning of Ravage Ritual, and he and I kind of wrote about half of that song just on guitars and in the basement. There was this one day that I guess Russ couldn't come over, and it was just me and Jesse, and we wrote Lives of Serpents, A River of Tears, and A Fall Farewell, both right after each other in a period of like 1 hour. We wrote all the music for it, and that was really cool. I remember Jesse just started playing the drums, and I just played the simplest riff ever over it, and we were like, yeah.
Blood and Fire, you know, we went to Barry Pointers to do that album.
The band I knew was completely different than the band that showed up at the studio, and thank God they were like 1,000 times better than the old band, so it worked out. It worked out awesome. Russ was super quiet, really arty, really soft-spoken. He even played softly. I kept having to tell him, play with aggression, play harder. You know, more aggression, more precision.
My fondest and biggest memories, I have 2 biggest memories of recording the album. One is really simple. There was, in To Think of You, that song, there's this double bass part in the song. And I remember Dan, when the part would come in, it's just like, I remember he would stand there and pretend he had a gun and go, right with the song, and he had his pompadour and it would flop. And I just remember cracking up at that. But my biggest memory of recording Blood and Fire was, I've tried to stay in the studio, you know, as much as I could. I love being in the studio. It's something I still love to this day. And I remember hanging out and playing all the bass and playing guitar. Yeah, playing guitar, of course, and played most of the bass. So I was in the studio for a while. And I remember when it was time for Dan to start doing his first vocal, we didn't want to stress him out. So I know I went into Barry, the guy who recorded the album, I went into his house, and I remember I was just sitting on his computer, and I was probably in there for a couple hours, maybe an hour or something, and Jesse comes in the house, like runs in, Brett, you gotta come outside, you gotta hear this. Walk into the studio, and it's Lives of Serpents, and it's the first time that, you know, I'd ever really heard it, and I hear Dan's vocals for the first time in the song, and I just remember just being in shock at how awesome he sounded. You know, I said a little bit before about Dan not finding his voice yet and not sounding very good. Well, all that died that day, and from then on, sounds like, you know, like a maniac. But I just remember, you know, we knew the music sounded good. We had heard it. We knew that the track was going to sound good, but it was all about what Dan was going to do on top of it and how his voice was going to end up recording. And I just remember just being floored by how he sounded, and everybody was so excited. Me and Russ were thrilled, and Jesse was thrilled, and it was just, yeah, it was just a moment that I'll never forget. The first time I heard that, it was awesome.
When that record came out, his voice, you know, Ryan and I immediately, that was like, you know, dude, the voice. Check out Dan's voice.
I remember Brett playing me the rough mixes of Blood and Fire in his car behind this little place, the Dairy Theater.
1998 was the year that made ZAO a popular band. We were on tour. I was on tour every day of that year except 2 days. ZAO was on tour for 8 months, and then I went on tour with Training for Utopia as a merch guy. And I was home for 2 days, you know, and like, we busted our ass that year.
I just remember multiple shows with all these kids just jumping up on stage, and I don't know, it was really mind-boggling, honestly.
A lot of people, you know, they think where Blood and Fire Bring Rest, when that came out, you know, that was you know, ZAO's prime, ZAO's pinnacle moment, you know, in history. You know, that's the designated album.
I don't know if we knew that it was really special. I don't think that we knew that the record would go on to be something that is somewhat of a cult classic record or whatever it is. I don't think we had any clue. We were just young kids that were excited to record an album and play together, really.
I don't care what little scene kid is watching this, like, without Blood and Fire, hardcore would be completely different. And I'm not saying that from an egotistical point of view. It was just like, I don't know, you'd have to travel back to 1998.
Split was when we began to get into the phase of, at the time, the church I was attending, which was an important part of my step, you know, in spirituality or whatever. We had put out a split CD with Seasons in the Field and Pensive, and there was a lot of support going into it, but when a lot of the people at the church heard it, there was things said along the lines of, the only way music like this could come about is through possession of demons. I would say that is when ZAO began taking the turn towards what we are now, which is not necessarily, I would say, a Christian band, but a group of people who have Christian beliefs, but understand that a lot of the church and a lot of the people involved in the church aren't good Christians. They look the part, they dress the part, they act the part, but when it comes down to it, their hearts, they have darkness in them, just like everybody else does. The song Walk On By, Walk On Me on the Training for Utopia split, the first few lines, Brett had written a song lyrically, and I took like the first 2 or 3 lines and I wrote from there. And it had to do with an elder's wife at the church who was a piano player and a worship leader, who was one of the ones that talked about how what we were doing was more or less demonic. I guess one of the things we always talked about in the struggle of this band was we were never Christian enough for the Christians, and we were too Christian for the non-Christians. Skin Like Winter is actually about Jesse Smith. He called me on the phone one night when I was at home and was just telling me a lot of things that were going on in his life at the time that prompted me to write Skin Like Winter. and a lot of it had to do with somebody that was so intelligent and smart and insightful in the ways of, you know, Christianity, but still at the same time I had a lot of doubts and a lot of struggle. I never looked down on him in any way. It was just, this is right in the prime after Blood and Fire, and he was talking about how he was doubting his beliefs a lot.
I started getting into some different stuff, like in my personal life, really questioning why don't you smoke? Why don't you drink? Why don't you say what you think? You know, why are you this person? Was this person what you were supposed to be? Did you fall in love with Jesus? Did you fall in love with your church? About that time, my church freaking sold me out horribly. Somebody saw me smoking like some cigar or something, and they sold all my drums. I was in the praise and worship band, and I went to a Bible college I was going to go to, and pastor of the church says, when all you homosexuals, or wait, he said something like, when all you fags decide to come up here and get the homosexual spirit delivered from you and take out your earrings. And I was like, my God, like, what am I? This is beyond the boundaries of a band. This is like who I am. And like, that was definitely when a giant seed of bitterness was planted inside of me.
We were trying to be good people. We were trying to present a good message and do it in our own way. And we received no support and no help from either the Christian side or the secular side. So we're more or less this band in limbo where, once again, you know, like, we're getting no recognition in the secular scene because people didn't have anything to do with Christian music. They felt that, you know, punk and metal were, you know, partly inspired by the rebellion against organized religion, which we weren't necessarily a part of, but a lot of the people that were involved in that were just, you know, it was almost like, you know, key words, like they would hear the word Christian, or, you know, they would hear the word God or whatever, and instantly assume that we had, you know, these certain views and certain, you know, standpoints that we never, you know, we probably had more in common with those bands than we did with, you know, the other Christian bands. And that's really, I think, when ZAO started becoming what it is from that point on, which was a band of people that had Christian beliefs but also had a lot of opposition. There's this, it's so crazy because there's so many differences. Like, you know, you take a good Christian in America and a good Christian in Europe. In Europe, where it's more tolerant to drink and, you know, like swearing and things aren't as big as a deal, and like tobacco and smoking cigarettes, you know, you start realizing that socially there's a lot of involvement. That the reason there's a difference is because, you know, American Christianity is these like Brady Bunch values, as opposed to like more true spiritual values that they carry in other countries. With a lot of opposition to the way that the church was treating people. And I think that's where it all started, was with the split. Because, you know, Skin Like Winter and Walk On By were both songs from a Christian standpoint, but kind of attacking at the same time Christian values in a sense. We're talking to all these kids that, you know, would have a tattoo or some piercings and they'd be kicked out of church. To me, accepting people for no matter what they are is one of the top priorities, in my opinion, in Christianity, and that wasn't being displayed by anybody. And it, you know, it made me sick, and I wanted to write about it. I wanted to, you know, not attack, you know, God himself or necessarily the Bible, but I wanted to attack the way things were being done in the church, because I thought it was wrong. People cared more about your, you know, presentation, the way you looked and the way you dressed, and, you know, if you attended church every week, as opposed to your actual spirituality. And to me, that's a farce, and it completely goes against everything we're trying to do. And I think that's where technically ZAO began, in a sense of what it is today.
split EP, that was quick. Jesse did his drums in one take each on the songs. Basically, we set them up, did it in like one take each, and then he went and talked on the phone to this girl for the rest of the recording. And me and Russ hung out in the control room and played our guitars, and I'm pretty sure Russ played bass on one song and I played bass on the other. I remember we borrowed training for Utopia's bass and their bass amp because we didn't have one. And I remember Dan flew through his vocals, and Ryan came down and did his thing.
It was real, like, you know, improv, like we didn't really plan on it or anything, but it was just really cool. And then like every show that I was ever at, like after that, I would always do it, which was always awesome. Like I always loved doing it, you know.
I'm a pretty brutally honest person, and if you're gonna be honest with everybody else, you definitely have to be honest with yourself. And I'm probably more brutal on myself than like anybody else I know, you know. And when the second incarnation of the band happened, like I started feeling like, man, why is this like this? Like, I'm not a separatist. I like want to be in a band with like my best friends. I want to die for these people, but I live 200 fucking miles away, and they have this clique they've had since they were 12. So instantly when that like incarnation started, like I completely felt like an outsider, even though it was like my band, which it's never been my band, and I've never said it was my band, and whoever's put those words in my mouth can blow me. But you know what I mean? Like, I started being like, man, this sucks, you know, because I didn't want to really live in Greensburg, and I had my own little life, like, you know, in West Virginia or whatever. So we just make the drives, and it was like lots of practice, you know, every week, blah, 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 lots of touring. And then it came around to Brett leaving.
Leaving ZAO was something that was a really difficult decision for me to make. I loved the band, you know, before I joined the band it was one of my favorite bands, and it wasn't something that I really wanted to do, but truth be told, Jesse was impossible to be in a band with. And I couldn't figure out up until that point why every other member of the band had quit, and he was the only original member. But after being in the band, I realized why every other member quit. And I don't mean to, you know, trash talk Jesse, because honestly, I love the guy genuinely, and he's a wonderful person to be friends with outside of the band, but he's not easy to be in a band with.
He had started doing the Juliana Theory with all those dudes as a side note. And I think with any marriage of sorts, which being in a band is definitely like a marriage, things get in the way of things, communication breaks down, people start to get attitudes. Definitely when there's two camps involved, people start to talk, and then problems start.
He would say a lot of really terrible things about me to fans of the band and to other people when he didn't know I was around, or when he thought I wasn't around, or word would get back to me. And I almost quit in the middle of the tour. I was seconds away from packing my bags and flying home in the middle of the tour because of some stuff that he said. He'd come to my town and hang out with my best friends, and I remember he was there one time when I was away, and the whole time all he did was badmouth me, and you know, to my best friends, who of course are going to tell me everything he said. And I just knew that I didn't want to be in a situation like that, where I understand that not everybody's always going to get along in a band, but Jesse had this issue where he seriously could not be happy with anybody or anything that anybody did, because I don't think he was happy with himself.
Brett would have left ZAO whether me and him weren't both control freaks, you know, but I don't know. Just like anything else, it was a bummer, because I think he's amazingly gifted. He's written so many songs I just freaking think are great, you know, and yet another guy that I know Brett, and the dudes in ZAO know Brett. Nobody else knows Brett. Just because he wears a purple Elvis suit and shakes his ass, it doesn't mean you know him. I think Brett's totally chill, you know. I haven't been the best friend to him. He hasn't been the best friend to me, but, you know, people make these assumptions about how it all went down.
Leaving the band was a great decision, because since then, he and I have, you know, are friends, I think because we're not in a band anymore, and I think that, you know, ZAO's better than ever now, with all the members that they have in the band.
He left ZAO because he had something else inside of him and in his heart to freaking go for it, you know? And obviously, like, the Juliana theory and him being a songwriter was what he was supposed to do. He wasn't built for metal for his entire musical career.
In the back of my head, I knew that, you know, I could do the theory and do that full time if I wasn't going to be in ZAO. And maybe if I hadn't had the theory, I might not have as quickly made that decision, because there was probably somewhat of a musical reason. There's definitely something that was a little bit limiting about just playing hardcore, not being able to, you know, to play different. I guess it's just that hardcore in general is somewhat limiting, because there were these rules. At least it felt like there were rules that, you know, you got to scream and you got to do this type of song. And I wanted to be able to, you know, write different type of music, and it was definitely easier to make the decision knowing that I had the Juliana theory. Though I don't believe we were a, you know, a full-time band yet at that point. Yeah, actually, I know we weren't, and so it wasn't like I didn't quit because of the band, but I'm sure it had something to do with, you know, making it easier to make that decision.
Brett had this like thing to him that maybe like ZAO didn't have at that time, like the rock flash, you know? I mean, obviously, come 99, when I was a skinny little pup, you know, I rocked makeup heavy duty and was obsessed with the fashion. I went to fashion shows, you know, like, Brett just had this like swagger though, that, you know, I don't know. I think Brett was supposed to be in ZAO for like a reason, and like, but just for the time he was in it, you know.
When we released Blood and Fire up to recording the split with Training for Utopia, we did about a 7-week tour, and I believe it actually ended in Indianapolis. You know, there was a giant parking lot. Myself and Jesse and Russ and Brett were sitting out there, and Jesse was more or less talking about how he couldn't do this anymore. There's certain people that when they act a certain way, you know there's no use in arguing. It might not be what you want to hear, but you take it with a grain of salt and you move on. That's really all you can do. You know, Jesse, you know, he was the leader at the time. We didn't necessarily break up, but we were, I guess, if you look at it in terms of we're taking a sabbatical. Myself and Russ and Scott, I remember just being totally blown away by him when he was in Chapter and Creation, just thinking like, not only technically was an amazing guitar player, but I remember seeing this show where he literally was like playing guitar and playing these like, this was like before Dillinger Escape, playing these like amazing like technical riffs, and he was like literally standing on his head.
When we started Chapter, it was very like influenced by Suffocation and like real death metal, crazy Morbid Angel type of stuff. Actually, the band that influenced me the most from the hardcore scene was Overcast. Those guys were like more of a technical metal band in the hardcore realm, so we took that and we just played as fast as we could with our fingers, I guess. We just wanted to do something different, like as everybody in Pennsylvania was like that. Nobody really wanted to sound like anybody else, and we just tried to be all weird and different and as dissonant as you possibly can, because everybody else at the time was just, you know, crunches. So it was cool to do something like that.
When we took this so-called sabbatical, we started a band that had a couple different names, actually.
Actually, the first name we came up with was From Autumn to Ashes, like for real. And it's so insane to me that From Ashes to Autumn, or what is it? No, we were From Ashes to Autumn, and they were From Autumn to Ashes. But
we were going to be called 5 Stars for Failure, and we ended up being called 8 Stars for Elijah.
It was me on guitar and vocals. Dan played guitar with me. We had a kid named Tim Krubar playing bass, and Russ played drums.
It was a very like a Sunny Day Real Estate, kind of like a very like heavy, aggressive, like indie rock type of band. Right as we started really getting into the groove, Tim moved to Florida, And during this all, Jesse called us, and he all of a sudden wanted to do the band again. You know, Scott was an amazing songwriter, an amazing musician, and you know, we would want nothing more than to have us. And at the time, he was having problems with, you know, his band and members in his band.
There was a lot of different reasons I quit Creation. Number one is definitely like I felt that the political rants and all the stuff that our singer was singing about didn't really reflect on me. I didn't want to be part of that. And at the time too, I wasn't really happy with the band. I wasn't happy with that style of music per se. When Blood and Fire came into play and I got to hear the first demos of the songs and just thinking like, wow, why did they all of a sudden turn into this type of carcassy metal band? Because that whole thing around, like right around our area was kind of that already. And I was so used to hearing that, and then when ZAO wasn't that, and then it turned into that from Blood and Fire, I was way more into the band at that time too, because I was kind of more of the style of music I liked. Unfortunately, I didn't feel like, wow, they were this new, different type of thing, because like I said, the band I was in was real metal and real like raspy vocals, and there were like 3 or 4 other different bands in the area were the same way. So I just felt that, you know, this is cool that Russ and Dan are bringing what our area is to what ZAO is now, but it wasn't like, well, these guys are like some new, awesome, different type of thing.
Me and Russ kind of insisted that Scott be in the band.
It kind of seemed to me that ZAO did have somewhat of a special thing in it, just from seeing outside of what it was. And it definitely felt more of like a real possibility as a career. I really, for the first time, felt like, wow, this could honestly be a career in music, so I'm gonna try this for sure. And that was a lot of the driving point of it for me. And then when I met Jesse for the first time with joining the band, it was really, really cool, and like it was an atmosphere that I felt comfortable in at the time. And it definitely worked out really awesome for me.
For him to be in the band was like natural for me. He's like amazing musician. Totally, let's do it.
Rob Horner, who came in on Liberate, Rob Horner was a friend of Jesse's from his area. And when we did Liberate, seeing that the bass on Blood and Fire was done by Brett and Russ, and you know, live we didn't have a bass player, so now we come to an album, you know, and we actually picked up a bass player not only to record but to tour with.
Rob came into the picture because he came to my apartment. He's a helpless little puppy dog, and was one of my best friends, and he's a good musician, and I was like, dude, why don't you join ZAO?
The Juliana Theory, right at the time where we were going in to record Liberate, that's when they really started taking off. It had nothing to do with like Brett ever saying anything, but a lot of things began to be assumed that like Brett had written more or less all of Blood and Fire, and a lot of people, you know, it had been this new incarnation of ZAO, and now we're approaching talking about doing the second album, and you know, people are starting to say, well, you know, now it is not going to be any good at all because Brett isn't involved anymore. And I remember, you know, we just started writing it, and I would say probably until Funeral of God, that was the most focused on album that we ever did.
The band at that time definitely became more of a metal band. Scott definitely brought that aspect when it came to, you know, guitar work and some of the writing. Scott added that, but also live as well. They all were, you know, great live guys at the time. But he also became a good spokesman for the band, where Jesse was always the vocal one. Scott definitely was an intelligent voice for the band as well.
Scott totally took Brett's place as a very opposing, let's butt heads, we both have a vision, you know, and from the beginning I think that was problematic because I was a control freak for a long time. He's a control freak.
I definitely feel like I had a pretty large hand, but at the same time I did want to stay as new as I could and stay back and let those guys kind of do what they've always done, and I would just put my input in there every now and then. I wasn't like a major, you know, huge songwriting, you know, blitzkrieg or anything. The cool thing was, though, is Jesse and Russ and everybody really wanted me to put my input in, and made me feel like that they needed some ideas or different things. So I felt very wanted in the band. But I did try to stay back as much as I could and not, because I did write pretty much everything in that other band. And I came from a band where I was the main songwriter in it. So it was a little weird for me to step down a little bit, but I didn't mind at all at the time.
Right before we did Liberate, like, I really, like, I'd moved out and I totally just went through this thing, you know, I never drank, never, I was kind of just like goody two-shoe, like freaking whatever, scene kid, you know, and I don't know, you know, I got into Bowie, I got into Manson, I didn't get into drugs, that was never my thing, but I got into depression. It's when it took a hold of my life, and I mean, I still deal with it now, you know, listening to dark music, sitting in my apartment, you know, just drinking, and, you know, really started having weird thoughts about stuff. Super into Neurosis at the time. I'm still a huge Neurosis fan.
We were all very heavily influenced from Neurosis on that record for sure. Like, I remember getting through Silver and Blood and loving it so much, and just loving, not necessarily like trying to sound like that band, but just the feeling you get when you heard that record, and the uneasiness of it.
Dark. Like, me and Dan watched dark, screwed up movies to take samples from. Like, we took a sample from this movie Deceiver, and you know, time to Deal with the Devil, like, and you know, all the Event Horizon.
In ZAO, I mean, we had a formula of, you know, you're a kind of a hardcore, metalcore, whatever type of band. So you have to have like a little bit more upbeat, maybe moshy parts, I guess. But we wanted to do something with that record to where it had that uneasy, real droney, dark feeling, but still have stuff catchy enough for like kids to jump around and do whatever they want to do in normal shows or whatever. So I think it was, for me, that was the hardest thing about making those songs and doing that record, was to have a good balance of that, because it's really hard to, if you think about it, mix something so repetitive and like drony with something that's a little more upbeat, and not necessarily upbeat, but like moshy, catchy, whatever.
That's my favorite record. Liberate is my favorite ZAO record.
What we tried to do was necessarily let the tones of the record set the mood more than writing the songs to set the mood. Because if you listen to that record, the guitars and everything's so, like, there's just this weird, like, sounds like somebody did it in a basement of just dirtiness. And even with Dan's, like, vocals, putting a little bit of a weird distortion effect on it just made it sound real gritty and it's real raw and very emotional. And I think that we took that definitely from the Neurosis production, because that's kind of how, you know, Through Silver and Blood was, Enemy of the Sun. Like, it was just real dark and weird.
I heard ZAO before, heard of them, and like didn't want to listen to them because of the whole Christian thing, but I just couldn't help but love that record. I thought it was just amazing, and every song on that record just blew me away.
It's still one of my favorite records ever. It's like one of the best things I think that they have done.
Liberate was definitely a defining record for the band. I think for a lot of kids, it was the first record, even more so than Were Blood and Fire, that they really latched on, because Dan at that point was becoming more vocal from the stage about some of the songs, what they were about.
My goal was always to write lyrically something that could be taken, like you would have a pretty good idea of what it was about, but at the same time it would be vague in the sense of it wasn't necessarily focusing in on a precise point. It was, you'd get the gist of it, but at the same time a lot of the details would be vague. that album has a lot to do with, if, there was a lot of like darker biblical sense in that, as far as like, it talks about like, our true life is after this life and death, and why not desire the end, and why not, want to see the world come to an end. A lot of people are pleading for peace and hoping things get better at the same time when, the Bible of the faith they believe in teaches us that things only get worse to the point where it ends. There was a song on Liberate called Savannah that was about, a pornography star that killed herself after she was in a car accident because, she's in this car accident, she goes home, she looks in the mirror and her face is just smashed to pieces, and she knows that regardless of surgery and things, she's not going to be, attractive in the sense anymore, and she decides that it's better to be dead than not be attractive. And there's a lot of things I wanted to start making people think about. At the time, a girl I ended up dating for a long time was sexually assaulted by the drummer of a praise and worship band at a church while we were on tour. And there's a lot that goes into that experience, for her and for me, in the sense that, once again, I was talking about, how we were feeling a lot of angst against the church in a lot of aspects, and then something like the drummer of a praise and worship band raping, my girlfriend, kind of added a whole new twist on that. It got to the point because of the label we were on. They were, at the time, they still are, and were at the time probably one of the main ranking, larger Christian, quote unquote, labels, as far as distribution through not only like the secular market, but Christian bookstores, where a lot of times, these mom and pops and Christian chains across the country will more or less take in and sell anything that they put out. So they definitely, understandably have to monitor what is, the product and things like that.
The Christian market had some problem with like the fact that I had pinup girls on both my forearms, and I was just like, are you kidding me? Like, what, do you think some kid's gonna go in the bathroom and get excited for the first time? Like, what, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't even think that record, I think from then on out, the Nail shouldn't have put ZAO in Christian bookstores.
I would write songs and like kind of lie about what they were about, because I thought that if people really knew what some of these songs were about, they definitely wouldn't probably be all right with the fact that they were in Christian bookstores. And not in the sense that I don't think they were unchristian, I guess if that's a word, but in the sense that maybe this was a little too, mature, or, not that necessarily I'm a, intellectual, mature person, but maybe this was a little too much for like, some kid to come in and purchase and think about.
Jason something was the graphic guy, and I remember I was really glammed out, like wearing like just tons of makeup, getting made fun of at hate breed shows, when we play with bands like that, and just totally my own thing, double stack creepers, 99, skin tight, everything, freaking just whatever, just not cutting edge maybe for like the hardcore scene because no one was wearing makeup, but definitely my own deal. And those guys were still kind of 50s out or whatever, and Scott was always his own person, but it kind of bothered me because then the layout comes too, and they put a giant picture of my makeup eye on there, and it bothered me because I was so glammed out, and like everybody else was like, that's when I really like started to separate from ZAO. That's when I started to be like, God, I know they hate me because like I want to do all this stuff, and they just want to be a sick band, and I have way too many ideas, and I'm way too depressed.
I never at any point in my life didn't not want to be in the band, and I've always taken my aspect of it very seriously, and like, I've always respected, and treated it well. But there was just times where, I realized that it's hard for me because I just started working at a good job, and I didn't excel in high school or anything. Just because I didn't, high school was the worst time of my life, and I hated it, and I just wanted to get through with it. I didn't care if I did well, I just wanted to get out. So I get out of high school, I'm not expecting to ever, do anything work-wise that I like in my life. And I get, offered this tattoo apprenticeship.
I was really disappointed by Dan, was getting into tattooing. Russ was under Dan. Any decision Dan made, Russ did.
Jesse was constantly wavering. One week he would be so excited about the band he couldn't contain himself. The next week, every breath out of his mouth is, I can't wait to quit this band. I love you guys and, the fans or whatever, but I hate this band. It's a curse and stuff. And, I'm like torn between, all right, I'm having someone help me with a career, or do I want to be in a band and give everything up to be in a band where every day the drummer changes his mind whether he wants to be a band or not be a band.
Me personally, I needed some time. I felt like, my life, I needed to do something else. I needed to make sure I was maybe 20 or 21, maybe 22, I can't exactly remember, but I needed to make sure that, if this is what I'm doing, is this really what I need to be doing? And Dan felt the same exact way because of, his career at the time and the instability of Jesse Smith and, what he wanted. And it was a battle between the two. And we were really frustrated.
There was all these occasions where like 2 or 3 days before, I would have 2-day notices that we were gonna leave for a week. And I was like, all I need is a little bit of time. Just, if you let me know ahead of time, it's fine. And it would be 2 days you have to leave. And so there started to be stress with me at work. And I wasn't an established tattoo artist yet. And I'm learning under this like awesome guy. And it had nothing to do with my love for the band, but it was like, I know that, there's no metal bands with 55-year-old guys in it, Like, one day I'm gonna have a job. And, hopefully maybe I can make a career of music, but I'm not gonna bank my life on that. Like, I'm not a gambler. I'm not just gonna like say, yeah, I'm gonna make it in music and just not care. So, I'm getting this awesome opportunity to have like more or less someone help me with a career. And at the same time, the communication of the band was so horrible.
Dan and Russ were pretty crafty on this one. We got real drunk while we were doing Liberate, and we were sitting out on the porch at the La Quinta, where we always stayed in Little Rock, and I told them, I'm like, I love you guys so much. I'm like, anytime you ever don't want to do this, don't be offended if I like keep doing it, whatever. And sure enough, the following summer, we're ready to go on tour with Nile and Today's the Day, and I get a letter in the mail, and it's telling me they're not going on tour, and I was like, oh my God, Dan just quit ZAO. It sucked,
We wrote a letter to Jesse Smith stating that we didn't want to be in the band, and, we wanted to pursue, other things that might, come about our lives.
What am I supposed to do? I have no idea. So, and it wasn't a decision I made overnight. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna step back from the band, because if I can honestly say, if at the time I would have known that the band would not break up, I would have done the band. But Jesse, at the time he was the leader of the band, and I didn't have faith that he wanted to do it. Like, I didn't have faith that this was gonna be a long-term thing. And I wasn't gonna give up a definite long-term thing for, this like shaky, I have no idea what's going on week to week.
And that was the first time too where I started getting really pissed, because I felt like everybody like totally, their perception of me, it was like totally weird. Like, it was totally like, he's a nut job, he says whatever he wants, he's a dick, he treats his band like blah blah blah, he thinks he's a rock star. And like, in my mind, that was the last thing I was thinking about. Like, I was thinking about if I could get enough balls to like blow my brains out or like, my wife entered the picture right after, like right during Liberate era, you know what I mean? Like, I was definitely on like, soon to be ex-wife, but definitely on the path to like, destruction mode, and I mean, God always drags me out of that, you know. I'm like, praise God because he's faithful, you know. And I mean, we're totally like, we're consumed with all these things that like rob the joy and life out of us, you know. And it's like, you know, God is just so graceful, you know. He's just grace, dude.
I was in a situation at the time when all that stuff went down. I remember when we actually were in Indianapolis at the Emerson Theater, and when all this, the whole talk of Dan and Russ leaving the band kind of came up, and them talking about writing a letter to Jesse saying, you know, we're done with the band, we don't want to do this anymore. There was definitely part of me that wanted to leave with them, just because of the situations that we got put in, like with, you know, different attitudes of people, and you know, it didn't feel like we should be doing it anymore. But there was also 50% of me that all I wanted to do with my whole life was play music. And if anybody was even going to remotely try to keep going, I couldn't quit. I couldn't do it personally, because I loved it too much and I didn't want to leave it. And I always thought that, you know, maybe I could change what's going on. Maybe I could make people like to do it more. Maybe I can do this. And I always felt like I could do that, but I mean, I guess I really couldn't. But I definitely didn't want to stop doing it.
I remember having a conversation with Scott and him just being like, it sucks because like he told me this like, you know, probably like 2 years ago when ZAO got back together to do what would become Funeral of God. But he was just like, I just love hanging out with you and then love like playing. And I was like, I feel the same way, you know. And then he's like, but when it's you and ZAO, it's a monster, you know. It's like you become like, you know, I mean, there's so many different people to blame, but I'm not in the freaking, like, where I'm at now in life. I'm not in the position of pointing fingers, and, you know, it's like, I made so many mistakes, but I definitely think Dan and Russ taking off was when I started being like, you know, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I'm sick of people telling me, like, ooh, because you go ape while you play, you're such a good drummer, and blah, blah, blah. Do you like me, or do you like the fact that, you know, whatever, you know, and I became consumed with the idea of Jesse from ZAO, you know, and they left, and I remember me and Rob reading that letter, and I called Scott, and we were just all like, come on, dude, like we were bummed, and it was 2 days before a tour. Called Corey Darst, learned all the songs, went on tour.
That was still when I was really first getting to know Jesse, and like we were still kind of, he was closer with me at the time because I was a new guy in the band, and I think he might have looked to me as a mediator between everybody, because I wasn't, you know, I didn't see certain things the way he was, and I didn't see how Dan and Russ kind of viewed it, a lot of the things. So I kind of stuck with Jesse at the time because I thought, you know, if this guy completely lost every member of his first original band and replaced them, he could probably do it again. Let's see if we can do it. And Liberate was one of our strongest selling records and was doing so well that I just couldn't, in my heart, see why to stop doing it.
And then toured our asses off with him, and I remember Dan coming back into the picture and us just being like, see ya, Corey. Later.
With Self-Titled, I remember that record because talking to the band, they were broken up, but they were going to go and do a record anyway. They had maybe 2 songs written when they went to the studio with Barry Pointer. I remember Barry Pointer calling me specifically from the studio saying he was going to send the guys home because they had nothing written.
Weirdly enough, that was probably one of the least stressful records I've ever done with Jesse, because we kind of both had some ideas for songs. I had a slew of things I wanted to do with different songs, and we just threw them together kind of in like 2 or 3 practices.
I always felt bad, like I was annoying him because I started wanting to sing and like try stuff, and I wasn't naturally like really good at it yet, you know, not that I'm not good at it now, but I can do it, you know. And I knew he wanted to, you know. It would piss me off if like I was in a band with somebody like me. I'm like, Scott's just shredding and Dan has all these, but there's always like, you know, I always had valid ideas though, and I was like, come on, like, hear them, you know, don't be mad because it's not yours or whatever. Like, you know, I was never into like, it started by that point to get into like a who does what thing. And I think a lot of that was created by me and Scott a little bit.
But then we get this demo in, or the, you know, the mix in, and it's another profound ZAO record. I mean, it was such a great record for them.
It was really cool, and I was stoked to do it, because the cool thing about it was it wasn't something that we wrote beforehand. It kind of all came together while we were doing the record.
I drove down there in my Jetta because I got in a car wreck while I was there.
Me and Jesse were the only two riding down, which was actually a cool ride down. Oddly enough, we wrote 5 Year Winter on the way down to the studio in the car, because we got caught in a traffic jam right at Charleston, and we were sitting there for like an hour and a half, and we didn't know what was going on.
We wrote that song on the dashboard.
He was like, I have the drum part, play it on the dashboard of the car.
He had these riffs, and I was like, well, maybe it should, you know, do this. And I I hummed the breakdown. I was like, what you go like, dun dun, and then we'll use bottles. And yeah, that's totally how it was.
Like, all these songs were as new to us as they would be to the person that heard the record, instead of most bands where they'd write their songs and work on them for months and months and months and then get to do the record, and they're sick of the songs already, but they're recording it for the record. But for us, it was like they just kind of came to us already, and it was all new. So when we got the record done, it was like, man, these are like new songs. We haven't heard them yet. It's so cool. So it was a really exciting record for me.
That was a good time because it was like like the vision you have of bands in the studio, the different instruments and like the whole thing. We partied a lot, like Scott partied a lot. It was fun, you know. It was cool, yeah. That's a good point to make, because it was really fun, and it was just me and Scott.
But at the same time, when I look back, we took no time on it, and I'm, you know, disappointed in all kinds of different things about that record. I still hate to this day the sound of the drums. I never was into doing that ridiculous V-drum fake sounding trash. I never liked it. But, you know, just to not cause any kind of riffs, I just went with it. And then I got to do my guitar tones, so whatever. I wasn't going to say, don't do these drums this way. But yeah, I mean, that, to this day, if I could re-record that record with real drums, I would give anything to do that.
Dan came down for a couple days and just sang on it.
What Dan did, Dan flew down afterwards, and he was there for like 3 or 4 days to do his vocals.
By now I'm living on my own, struggling to pay my own bills, and you know, Jesse calls me and says, hey, you want to make, you know, a little bit of money? We're going to do another album. I definitely was personally interested, and I had always have, and to that point had been working on lyrics, not necessarily for ZAO, but just, I always just kind of write a lot of stuff down as far as, that's how I deal with a lot of things, is just writing my thoughts out. Everyone wanted to do a good job on their part, but as far as like putting it together, it was very rushed and very thrown together, which is strange because people love it, and it's like it literally was like thrown together, like kind of like when you have to write a paper for school and you put it off, and the night before you know, have to go to school the next day, you sit down and grab a bunch of encyclopedias and you know, books from the library and stay up till 4 in the morning and crank out some paper. It's more or less how Self-Titled and Pray to Chaos were. Like overnight homework assignments, kind of. There were songs like 5 Year Winter that, you know, we were like, oh, that's cool. And it was put together real quick, and I heard that song, and I'd like written a letter to a girl, and when I heard that song, it just made me like instantly think of the letter, and you know, weird little things like that, like little 5-minute decisions, not long, pre-planned ideas, just little quick, you know, on the spot. That's pretty much what this band's always been like. Probably besides like Blood and Fire, Liberate, and Funeral of God, like everything between there was just like chaos.
That is the history of ZAO. It's just constant turmoil, constant tragedy, constant strife, but for some reason they're able to make this incredible thing. They've always been able to make just incredible things out of all this tragedy, and that's to me what ZAO has always been about. And it is ZAO. I mean, the tragedy is ZAO.
I had already started talking about like how like Self-Titled was the last ZAO record, kind of unfairly to like Scott. I'd started running my mouth a little bit and being like, I'm not doing it. ZAO's done.
ZAO in Greek, originally named as alive, spiritually alive. In essence, kind of like third eye open, you know, realizing spirituality and not only realizing but being alive in it. And through that, we're going to call it Alive is Dead. But at the same time, not necessarily influenced or known, the Juliana Theory had put out an album called Emotion is Dead. And we felt because of Brett's, you know, involvement in ZAO earlier that they would think that, you know, we were just helpless and we were stealing his ideas to, you know, just being too close to being on the same label and having such a close name and having, you know, one of the members of the other bands had been in the other band. So Alive is Dead was my suggestion prior to even knowing about Emotion is Dead, because it more or less meant ZAO is dead. Like, this is our last album, ZAO is dead.
It started to get really weird between me and Scott, because then it was like, he'll write all his songs, I'll write my little songs, we'll show them to each other and kind of do it. Self-Titled wasn't like that as much. We did it like that, but like, you know, then it started getting super separatist. Like, I mean, being like, I'm hurting him and he's hurting me, but like, I'm the only person that gets blamed for anything. And then Russ just being around here and there and Dan coming and going, and I was just like, this is a fucking circus. And like, but like nobody in the band thought it was. And I was just like, look at these other bands. Like, this is not how bands work. Bands break up. And then I started being scared of like, oh, what if I don't do this anymore? I suck at playing guitar. I suck at singing. You know, I did some dumbass solo album that sold 5,000 copies and I never got paid for. I did that during that time, you know, horrible. You know, I was just like kind of like lost. I wasn't going to church, you know, just doing whatever, you know.
You know, Corey did vocals for a while, and I mean, I love Corey. He even, I came back, like, you know, there was a period in there, and then when I came back, he played bass for a while. And I mean, me and Corey, as far as I know, have always been, you know, on really good terms, and I've always respected him and, you know, liked him. And then I was back in the band again, you know, because, you know, hey, like I was saying before about the albums, you know, hey, here's some money, come record, then we're gonna play some shows. And then we'd record and play some shows, and then it'd be the same thing, like I'm being told about playing shows or leaving for 2 weeks, 2 or 3 days ahead of time, or I can't go play this show in 2 days, so I get, you know, yelled at, more or less, because I'm holding the band back. And not only did I feel that personally I needed, you know, something more stable, but I felt that if these guys really want to do this, which I didn't have faith, not necessarily in the band, but there were certain members that I didn't necessarily have faith in that we're going to keep doing it, you know? So I'm torn. What am I supposed to do? So I felt, you know, like I said, this wasn't an overnight decision. This is like literally like sitting around and thinking for hours, thinking about the pros and the cons and this person and myself. And, you know, I come to a decision, well, I'll back down, you know, because there's people willing to take the chance, and I'm not willing to take the chance because I don't trust that certain people are stable enough. It's like gambling, you know? It's like you can say, I'm gonna bet $5 that the sun's gonna rise tomorrow morning. You know, I'll bet on that, but I'm not gonna bet on, you know, a horse or something. You know what I mean? It's like you take gambles in life, but some are way more intense than others, and I just couldn't. It just didn't seem like, to me, it was gambling to stay in the band at the time. It was just a bad idea, and I did not love the music. I did not care about the fans. I didn't not want to tour. It had nothing to do with it. It had to do with, I was worried that if I put all my eggs in one basket, that basket was gonna, you know, drop into the lower regions of hell, and I would never see those eggs again.
And that was definitely a strange time. I think the coolest thing about that whole era was the fact of becoming friends with Corey, because Corey was one of the most genuine, awesome dudes that I've ever been in contact with. And the band was, I mean, we definitely toured a lot, and I think that touring really hurt everybody. And I think that the attitudes and the problems that we had really stemmed, and I finally saw that tour, like what it was going to be like with Jesse and the way he was and the way he always wanted to quit and the way he would hate everything and be disappointed in everything. Those tours were the first time I really saw that. And the weirdest thing about the whole situation was, for me, Jesse was never combative towards me, and he was never ever like real, I don't even know how to explain it. Just, he didn't give attitude to me, but I saw it in everything. And I saw the way he treated other people, and I saw the way he reacted to situations. And it just, that definitely was a time where I wanted it to be over, for sure. I didn't want to do the band anymore. And Corey came in to fix, you know, what was broken, but it was never a real fix.
Was there ever a time where you just like were sitting in the van, you looked around and you were like, where's everybody? Like, where's Russ? Where's Dan? Like, what happened? Like,
Every day. Every day. I mean, I don't know, you kind of get blinded by your own want for success. And I think that all the stuff that happened in that era, now that I look back on it, it was just such a wrong decision to do. And even though, like you just said, how I wouldn't trade anything for, you know, Corey's friendship, because that was the coolest thing out of that whole thing. But at the same time, I mean, you have, you know, two members of a band that were such integral, important parts of a band, and to not have them there with you, it was completely wrong. It was like if I would see Led Zeppelin with Robert Plant and like Guns N' Roses behind him or something. Like, it was just horrible to look around and see what it turned into. Because at that time, I mean, the tours were going good, the band was doing a little better than it was, and we were starting to actually kind of make a little bit of money and make a career out of it. But it just wasn't ZAO. I mean, and the saddest thing about it is Jesse had me believing that as long as Jesse was a part of it, it would be ZAO. But, you know, the more and more time went on, you definitely realized what the most important parts of the band were.
In my opinion, as a fan of ZAO, as someone who really respects deeply what ZAO has done, Dan has always been the focal point of the band. Dan's lyrics, Dan live, Dan on stage. I mean, everything about ZAO to me for so long was Dan. And a lot of times I think with kids, when they had a different singer, it was very difficult for that to transfer well, because Dan was such a, even though he was so reluctant to be a spokesman for the band, he was the face of ZAO to many people, both on stage and on record. So I think that, you know, they had great, you know, some great guys on tour with them when Dan wasn't in the band, but the reality was it wasn't ZAO. It wasn't the ZAO that people paid to see. It wasn't the ZAO that people wanted to buy on record as well.
What happened on that show was I walked on stage and I knew Jesse was hanging out with a bunch of his friends, and we were all hanging out back there, and it was fun. There was like a little backstage area that we all hung out. Dan was there. We were just having a good time. We went up on stage, and I definitely knew beforehand that Jesse was completely incapacitated. But it was so much fun, and we were just hanging out, and I was like, whatever, this will be cool. Well, we get up on stage, and second song in, he is pretty much off of every timing part of the songs and stopping early every time on every part.
I got freaking jacked out of my skull, went on stage, thought I could do it, did it for years. The mix was a little different in my brain, screwed up the show.
And I'm playing and I'm trying to like compensate for all this mess up, and I couldn't do it anymore. And the running thought was that I kind of screamed at Jesse and yelled at him and we walked off stage. But actually what happened was I walked over to his drum set and I looked at him and I'm like, I don't think we can play these songs, man. You're a little too messed up. Instead of embarrassing ourselves, let's get the hell off the stage. And that's all really it was.
I'm incapacitated. I can't play our songs, I'm sorry. This is pretty much like the last freaking, this is it. Like, I don't think ZAO's gonna be a band much longer, man, so thank you.
Didn't give a not a damn. Seriously, just didn't care. I hated Scott for what we had let each other become. I hated myself that I was playing in a lie. I'd always had a bad, and I still have a problem with ZAO to this day. Stay away from the Christian music scene. Don't take something as precious as the name of Jesus and sell it to people that are morons. If you're a kid out there and you love the Lord, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with it. Music is music. You are you. Get over yourself. For f***'s sake, please, get over yourself. You know, people sin. That's why you're a Christian. Because Jesus died on the cross and his blood is what forgives you. You know, I'm not saying don't use his grace as an excuse or a credit card, but be yourself, you know? It's like, and we had definitely not became, well, not we, I can't speak for them. I was not myself anymore. I was in this band that I wasn't happy with the music. I was playing the drums and, you know, I was glad.
And there was so much tension there too because Corey was finally sick and tired of Jesse's attitude and sick and tired of what Jesse would treat him like because he was, you know, a new fill-in member. So any band, that person's going to get the brunt of garbage. That Corey didn't want to be in the band anyway, and Corey wanted to quit. And we were supposed to do a little week-long tour with The Theory, and I knew it was just going to be hell if we'd go on this tour anyway. So I walked back there, and it was almost like a whole decision without even saying it that we just would break up so we wouldn't have to do this tour because everybody's pissed off anyway.
Rob started crying, which blew me away. I was like, he's at the bar and he's crying. I was cracking up. Having a freaking, like, they were embarrassed and ashamed, and I wanted to get on stage and be like, yeah, all of you, suck it, you know? Because we're not your little freaking treasure. And the Juliana Theory is mad because we outdid them, because we just broke up on stage in front of 1,500 people. So Brett's pissed because his little acoustic encore isn't going to work. I was just like, it's hilarious. I was like, I thought it was great. So I went to the van and told everybody, and it hurt me bad on the drive home because I was like, I just hurt Scott. I just totally disappointed Corey.
Me and Jesse never yelled at each other, and actually the funny thing is after the show and after we broke up and all that stuff and everything happened the way it did, we walked down together, me and Jesse, to the alley, and he's like, are you mad at me, dude? And I'm like, honestly, not at all, dude. I'm kind of glad we're not doing this tour.
The next morning after we break up, you know, all these people are calling me, is it true, is it true? Is this a scam? Is this ZAO? You know, because I mean, it fueled the fire. By this point, my relationship with Tooth and Nail, completely crazy. Not good. Feeling a little ripped off. Scott's starting to feel a little ripped off because he's been on 2 records. Nobody's getting royalty checks. Our friends' bands are, but we're not. You know, every once in a while, you know, whatever is coming in. So, you know, beside the point, but like we're starting to get like a little chapped, you know, and I knew it was done. I thought it was it.
Creative Chaos and the All Else Failed records were kind of started by Jesse calling Tooth and Nail.
Which was funny because Jesse and a couple other members in the band had been very vocal about Tooth and Nail, against Tooth and Nail and Solid State in the Press. And it was almost funny, but it was also kind of sad when they did another record as well because it seemed very half-hearted. It was a record that definitely, I thought, paled in comparison to some of the records. But there were some classic songs on that record as well, but still it was, in my opinion, you know, the Liberate self-titled Blood and Fire era, and even the new record to me was a return to form for the band. But definitely that time to me, thinking back and working with the band, the turmoil they were going through, the turmoil that we were kind of being drugged through with them, it was a bleak time for the band, a dark time.
Century Media, me and Corey had flown out there. They wanted to sign us. And Sanctuary wanted to sign ZAO.
We wanted to do another record basically for money because all of us were in complete disrepair and financial ruin because the band wasn't, you know, doing whatever. And
so I basically tell Tooth and Nail, we've got another record in us. I'd written like 3 to 3, Free the Wolf from his Cage song, whatever. Angel Without Wings, which was like, I'd started really doing some stuff on my own. I put out something called Oceans. I was talking to 2 labels. It was before like Gods, that whole thing in my brain had happened, but I was fully functioning on writing songs by myself and them not totally sucking and having people say, oh, this is good, you know, you need to work on this, blah, 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 but this is good stuff.
They would sign it and do it again if we did Parade of Chaos, and then if we would re-record an old record so they can actually have some, you know, a new version of these songs or something to sell them again or whatever. So, I mean, it was definitely motivated by financial reasons. Not that we made that much money, but it was enough to get us by.
Worked out a deal, a money deal with Tooth and Nail for me and Scott.
I remember Jesse kind of coming to me going, look, me and you write the songs, we can do this and make this X amount of dollars, and, you know, I don't know who we should get to sing.
He started coming to my house. I'd finally had my first little Pro Tool studio. He starts coming to my house, and we just wrote everything in, I think, less than a week. Put it all together on some V drums, did demos, went to Barry's, busted it out, and it was really like strange. Like, I think for both of us, it was the first time where like we weren't concerned about like the quality of it at all, the quality of anything we were doing. I mean, I know I wasn't, and I don't think Scott was really, because he just didn't really, we were on the same wavelength. We were really miserable. We thought the band was kind of a joke. At the time, I hated him, and I know he hated me. I didn't hate him. I've never hated him, but I know he hated me, definitely. It sucks to say that, but, you know. So, I was like, ZAO's manager, Ryan, has been one of my best friends for years, and I had called him because Dan was out of the picture totally. It was me and Scott, like, period. That was it. And we started just being like, should we do a record with like a guest singer? Like some random guy like ZAO and friends, you know? We talked to Ryan about possibly singing on it. Corey, there was a breakdown really bad when the breakup thing happened before Parade of Chaos, and frankly, like, no discredit to Corey, but no one had seen him, and me and Scott wanted the money. I was asking you, Ryan Downey, and just being like, you know, what should we do, blah, 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 and like you said, you actually told me, you know, Dan should be the singer on the record, no matter how bad, if like you wanted to do it, or somebody else wanted to do it, Corey, it was like, that was the constant thing. That's why Dan, the magic of Dan, you know, he, you know, I don't dismiss whatever, you know, and I'm glad, you know, they're at a point now where like a band is a band, and that's what I always wanted, and it wasn't meant for it to be that way, you know, but, you know, so we went with Dan.
Thank God you convinced him to have Dan sing on it. Because I don't think, I don't know, I'm pretty sure that if Jesse would have came to me and not had Dan singing on it, I wouldn't have done the record, I don't think. Just because, why destroy a legacy of a band for pretty much nothing anyway?
He actually flew down. Credit to him, this is amazing for all you screamers out there and singers or whatever. He recorded all of the vocals to Parade of Chaos, which a lot of people don't like, but I think is a cool, heshed out, weird dimension of ZAO that we had always wanted to explore. I mean, on all the songs I played guitar on, I tuned the guitar to E standard just to be an asshole and played a hollow body. And this is the most anti-metal thing possible. And it was funny, and we felt just like we were just cheating everybody, but in the end it came out cool. Like, recorded the drums on a 72 Slingerland with one tom, a floor tom, snare, cymbals. That was it. Double bass pedal. And Dan came down and in 3 days did all the vocals to Parade of Chaos without really hearing the songs, and all of the vocals to the cover of All Else Failed. He was only there for 3 days. I was just like, geez, he's a machine.
I didn't hear any of the songs on Parade of Chaos. I got a CD of the music in the mail, and all the songs weren't even done. And I got a CD of the songs in the mail 2 days before I flew down to record. So I had 2 days I had all the lyrics pretty much ready. Obviously things change once you hear the songs and you have to make adjustments, and that takes time, but you know, I had 2 days, you know, and I did All Else Failed, the re-recording of that.
And at the same time did probably the worst musical thing of all of our careers, you know, like redoing something as awesome. And I'm ashamed of it, actually. I mean, we had nothing to do with the layout, first of all. There should have been liner notes from the original members. The label left us out of it completely.
I was adamantly against doing this All Else Failed remake from the beginning. Number one, I think the biggest reason why I wasn't into it was because the first record that they did, the All Else Failed original record, had so much passion in it, because that band was right when they began, and that was right when they were starting to get a little bit of, you know, coverage and people were paying attention to them, that, you know, there was a fire on that record. And for us to just, you know, basically crap out this remake of old ZAO songs, like, turned my stomach. And I didn't want to do it so bad that I didn't even really learn the songs until we got to the studio. Like, I wasn't, like, into it. I was hoping we wouldn't have to do it. We actually tried to get out of doing it. But, you know, Brandon wanted it done, so we sat there, and right before we record every song on the record, we would sit there for 15 minutes learning it. And then we would record it. Same thing, you know, go find the next song, learn it, and record it. But I really, really, really wish we wouldn't have done that record, because I think that was kind of like almost a slap in the face to the old ZAO. It was like, you know, we're going to do these songs not even half as good as you did them for money. And I mean, yeah, the money was nice, but at the same time, man, was it a bad choice, I think.
We did the Metallica cover version of All Else Failed, and that was it.
My feelings, the good feelings about ending the band was just the release of all the crap we had to deal with, you know, everything that included in ZAO. And it's really weird because just the way Jesse was and the way how down he was all the time and how he always wanted to quit made you really think that ZAO was the problem. ZAO, this entity of the band or whatever it was the problem. Like, anything that bad would happen, it was like ZAO was a curse on us or something. So it was never like, it was really strange because you never looked, now that I think back on it, I never really thought about, like, well, you know what, Jesse didn't want to do it and Jesse's kind of messing this up. It was always like, man, it's the ZAO curse again. And I think the feeling of having that be laid to rest and be done with it was so relieving, and like, oh, you know, I was so thankful to not have to put up with what we've put up with for so long. Then the other side of it was the fact that this is something that I really thought I was going to make a living at and make my life, and we were going to stop it, and now what am I going to do? I was 24, never went to college because I pretty much was in touring bands since I was 17, and I had to start all over, and that scared the hell out of me because I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen, and just all different thoughts going through my head and stuff. But I think the relief of not being in the band anymore was a little better than the fear of what would happen in the future.
We did the re-release of All Else Failed. We've done Parade of Chaos. We decided we're doing our last tour. And this is, for me, definitely the end of it, period. Like, as far as I thought. And I thought Scott felt the same way. We had gotten paid. We were happy. Go on that tour. It's the tour with ZAO, Unearth, Under Oath, Dead Poetic, and The Underwater.
It was a fun tour because it definitely with the knowledge of knowing it was breaking up, the tension wasn't there because you didn't feel like you were working towards anything. It was just like kind of to go out with a bang, whatever. So there wasn't like that normal like fighting, bickering, the band's not doing too good, we didn't sell this many records, who cares? I mean, the band was over, so what? We'll do this tour, it'll hopefully do well, and you know, we'll go out with a good amount of money and have fun with it.
It sucks that it was our last tour because like things were so stressful, you know, just it was weird, you know, like things would get really cool, things would get really bad, and then they would just kind of stay like weird, and people would go in their own camps. Like it was weird for me big time because Rob wasn't on the tour, number one. You know, he wasn't involved in this kind of last run or whatever because, you know, it was just me and Scott, and then Dan came into the picture, and then Russ just ended up doing it.
I remember the very last show of that tour. We were in Lancaster, and I remember getting on stage knowing full well this was the last show, and it was the weirdest feeling I've ever felt because all this time, all this whole tour, I'm like so happy that it's breaking up, and then all of a sudden this last show, I'm like, well, this is it, and doesn't seem like it should be over, but I guess it's over, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I remember looking at Jesse playing and Russ and everybody, and there's something in, I was just like, why really are we stopping doing this? What is the main reason why we don't want to do this band anymore? And that's kind of like pretty much where everything came from. You know, from that day, I was like, why are we even stopping doing this? What is the main reason why? And then, you know, after thinking about it enough, you really realize why it was breaking up, and it was solely because of one person not wanting to do it anymore. And his attitude and the way he just did everything, taking everybody down to this level where this is your love and this is what you want to do for your life, but I hate being with this one person enough that I don't want to do it anymore anyway.
It was a pretty extensive tour. It was like, I think 6 weeks. And just by the end of it, you know, I was telling you, I thought I wanted it to be like this emotional, like awesome thing. And I mean, I thought we played great, you know, our last show, it was good. Just same damn songs, no. And I just walked away empty. I was like, that was that. I just dumped 10 years of my life in the toilet. I can't even cry about this. Like, it means nothing to me. Like something so beautiful that started in the beginning of all this, getting beer cans thrown at us in Cleveland, me, Sean, Roy, and Mick, literally getting like stoned to death with beer cans for preaching the gospel. And I hopefully never see these people ever again, even though I love them. I like could not take the fact that they resented me so much for whatever asshole things I'd done to like hurt them.
There was a resurgence. What had happened was there was a guy named Patrick that had came to us a while after Parade of Chaos and offered us a very large sum of money to do a new album.
For some odd reason, he found Rob Horner's email address. He emailed Rob Horner.
Rob calls me and is like, this kid called me, his name's Patrick, he's backed by a millionaire, we're his favorite band of all time, and he wants to give us 15 grand a year, basically $45,000 a person to do 3 records, and all we have to do is tour in the summer. So I'm like, 15 grand, huh, for 1 record, a person? Yeah.
When me and Russ and Dan, when we were done, but the kind of figures this kid was talking to everybody was mind-blowing, and I never thought I'd make that kind of money in a band, so of course we're like, yeah, let's do this.
So we get the original, basically not original, but in my mind, the quintessential ZAO lineup. No offense to what's going on now, but as far as like ZAO, you know, not happiness, just good ZAO, would be, you know, Liberate.
You know, Jesse and Rob kind of get in touch with us, and they're like, you know, would you guys want to do another record? This kid's talking about, you know, giving us each an advance of thousands of dollars, and we'll be able to do this record, and if it goes somewhere and finally takes ZAO to the next, you know, mountain that it needs to climb, awesome. If not, we'll just break up and we'll have all this money anyway.
some friendships had been restored and people were willing to give it a try.
And then we met, everybody got together as the band, Dan, Russ, all of us were all sitting around at Dan's house. And the kid that wanted to do the record label flew up to our hometown, came up, talked with us, had his whole contract written out, and we read all over it, and it was like pretty much too good to be true because, it was. But he came up with, half of the money he was going to give us. So all of us are, super into this because of the money at the time. And, we get the checks and we're all stoked, and we look at the contract, we all sign it. And we kind of started getting back in the swing of doing the band with Jesse and Rob in it, me and Dan and Russ.
We all get our checks, it's all cool and fine and dandy, and we start practicing, writing, and it's going really cool. I'm driving, meanwhile, freaking 400 miles a week. I start getting held out about that after a while, and then it starts getting taxing, and then money starts coming into it again.
And as that started, that's definitely when my thoughts started to come again, where we need to do this for real, because I'm having too much fun again, and writing these songs, I'm actually really excited about this. And it almost turned away from the money, because I was like, wow, this is really cool. I feel like this is maybe something we should be doing. And I know Russ felt the same way.
And monetarily, it was worth it. Not necessarily, on my aspect, but everyone's. And we began writing. We had written a few songs, like The Rising End was in its early stages, and Praise the War Machine.
And then, a couple weeks after that, when we were getting ready to leave, Patrick doesn't call us. Barry calls me. I didn't get the record. I didn't get the money for the record yet. I'm wondering what's going on. Call Patrick, I can't get a hold of the kid at all.
And about a week before we go into the studio, we get the call, oh, nope, it's all gone. It's folded. And, it's all just down the dumps.
They told me that his backers backed out on him. I guess there was somebody in the family that had some health issues, and they just weren't, able to really deal with this whole situation at all. So kind of completely, all in, a week, fell completely to nothing. But we've already started writing all these songs, and we were all excited to do this record, and we're all stoked to do the band again. So that's kind of where the whole Ferret thing came into play, because me and Jesse talked. We've known Carl forever, and Jesse thought, hey, you know what, if we want to do this, I'm going to call Carl and see what he would do.
Carl says, hey, do we have a shot? We have a real shot of signing ZAO, and we're both, Rick and I, didn't even hesitate. Sign him right now. Sign him.
Give them whatever they want.
Yeah,
and
it was the first time it was the first band that ever got an advance. It was the first time. It was it was a cool step for Ferret, and
it was a big step.
It was one of our first risks, and it's definitely it's paid off, and it's not like we're backstroking in money from them, but the record's definitely been successful, and the next record we're in a great spot for that to just to keep going.
And definitely Jesse gave me the story of how he had to make Carl want to do the record, and how he worked out everything, and I know all it was hey, Carl, ZAO wants to do a record on Ferret. Carl was like, cool, let me see if I can do it. So there wasn't really that much work involved, I don't think. But so Ferret started getting on board with everything, and Carl was getting excited about it, and everything was cool. And then that was kind of right around the time when we went and had a meeting with Dan about doing this band for real. And we kind of gave him like a 4-day period to say if he wanted to do this 100%, or if he was going to have to do the shop and we weren't be able to tour as much as we wanted to tour, because we wanted to do at least 7 months a year, go crazy and do this for real.
Dan starts not coming to practices when, when I'm there, driving there, it's 8 hours of my freaking day. He's not coming to practice because he's asleep. Then some stuff happens with some addiction stuff, with him, and that Russ and Scott are just not cool with, at all. And I'm not cool with it either, but I was there for him a lot through those times.
Pretty much, I was saying I'll do this full time, you know, okay, you know, and Jesse was saying things like, you know, we're back as brothers again. It was the Liberate lineup, and he was talking about getting all our names tattooed on him and things like that. And then I found out, you know, a week later that he's been talking to someone else for 2 weeks because he wants to go on tour in 2 weeks and make money. And if I'm in the band, and he knows I'm not gonna go on tour in 2 weeks, therefore I mean nothing because I'm standing in the way of someone making some money.
Little did we really know that, you know, in the back of all this stuff, Jesse's talking to Josh Ashworth about, you know, if Dan's not 100% dedicated, I wanted to have some kind of backup plan or whatever. So if Dan doesn't want to do it, I'll get somebody else to do it. So that's why he called Josh or whatever after I found out what was going on. But we were talking to Dan, and then Jesse brought that to my attention that, you know, if Dan doesn't want to do it, Josh Ashworth said he would. So I'm like, all right, the blinding of it, the, oh, we have to do this, the you know, kind of manipulative things that you get said to you when people's lives are at stake or whatever. You know, it kind of comes into play, and very awkwardly and ill-willingly, me and Russ agreed on if Dan didn't want to do this, do ZAO full steam, we needed somebody that would do it full steam. So the last day came to when Dan was going to tell us if he was going to do the band or not, and Dan never said he couldn't do the band. He just said that he didn't really think he could. He didn't really know if he could. He didn't want to leave his shop if, you know, just because of the instabilities. He didn't know if it was going to work. He was a little worried about it, but he never really once said, I'm not in. I'm definitely not in.
Basically, they forced me to kick him out. I don't want to cause any problems because everything's cool now, but like my perspective is, you know, especially Russ, really uncomfortable with the behavior going on. And they basically were like, well, Jesse has balls. He'll tell anybody anything he thinks. And he's always a scapegoat for being the dickhead. So let's have him kick Dan out of the band. You know, and for me, it sucked because I was like, finally, we're back together. And we all have money in our bank account. And it's all going to be okay because it's always okay when you got the money, right? You know? So, yeah, so we kick him out. And I have other people, you know, that were around and they know, you know. It freaking killed me to, like, kick out my friend, especially when he's freaking going through all this.
Jesse was putting words into Dan's mouth about not wanting to do the band. You know, we know you don't want to do it. We're not going to hold it against you, man. You're our brother. We love you. Everything's, you know, cool if you can't do it, man. It sucks. We'd love you to do it, but if you can't, we can find somebody else, and we're going to keep doing this band. But if you can't, then whatever.
I think I took it very well, and I just stepped down. And I guess that was the death of the original, you know, incarnation until Funeral of God.
But so we boot him, and Josh Ashworth comes into the picture. I'd been talking to him, and, you know, we decide, yeah, we're going to hire Josh Ashworth.
So me and Russ drive to West Virginia, and we're going to record a demo for Carl. We get in there and we, you know, record, I think we recorded 3 songs. One was Beginnings of the Rising End, one was Beginnings of Praise the War Machine, and then the other song, I don't even remember what it was. And we had Josh fly in from LA to record this demo with us, and he stayed there with Jesse for a week or whatever. And we recorded this demo, and I remember the first time I heard Josh go into the bathroom to sing these songs, he went to the microphone and he started singing them. And he was a little out of practice because I know he hadn't sang for a while, and it was a little weird. But I remember looking at Russ and going, you know what? This might work, man. This might be okay.
We put a tour together. We go on tour in the States with Further Seems Forever.
And we're on tour with Josh. And then we get to LA. Our friend Ryan was there at the show. I walked with Ryan outside, and we were just walking down the street and hanging out and just having fun, whatever, talking about the band. And Ryan brought to my attention that Jesse pulled him off to the side and said, I hate being in this band. I don't know why I started doing this again, and I'm sick of it, and I want to quit. And that was the very first time that all of this Jesse stuff started again, because up until then, I thought everything was stoked, everybody was excited, we were ready to do the band, everything was great. So after this came to my, attention, I told Russ, and I said, look, I don't want to burst our bubble, but it's going to be the same bull crap that we've dealt with forever. And Jesse doesn't want to do this anymore. He pretty much just wanted to do it to get some money, which is fine, whatever. That's awesome. He has a family. I want him to not be in financial ruin. Awesome, whatever. But there's still the situation of me and Russ are extremely excited and think this band's going to work, and then you have this happen again, which is the ongoing story of this band, so whatever. And I also asked my friend Ryan what he thought of Josh Ashworth, and he pretty much as usual, confirmed my already thoughts I didn't want to bring out, but the only person that should be singing in ZAO is Dan, and that's how it should be, and that's how I knew it should be too, anyway. So, I find out all this stuff. And actually, another little funny side note to that story is that when I talked to Portland months after we finally signed the deal and stuff, he actually came up to me and said, the first thing that Jesse said to me at that dinner meeting we had was, when was my check going to be in the mail? And yeah, I just kind of laughed it off, but yep, that's kind of what it was,
Basically, we ended up going straight on tour to Europe, and that's when I knew, I was like, I just don't want to do this. I was like, I want to start a new band. I want Scott to be happy. I want Russ to be happy. I don't want to be the freaking butt of their anger, the freaking root of their talk. And I was kind of done talking about them. All the crap, tour cancellations, the this, the that, that was all behind, because when we got this new deal, I was like, cool, start over, a new chance.
We did a tour of Europe with Josh Ashworth on vocals, and at that time I was advised by a friend that's been there from the beginning, advising me every step of the way. Josh didn't seem like he was the guy for the job, and I think Jesse actually started feeling that too, because me and Jesse talked about that, where he just didn't have what Dan had and what ZAO was. I think his whole stage presence and the way he wrote his lyrics were personal, but they were a little more almost California, that whole thing where you're a little more about the flashiness than the true meaning and feeling of what the band is and what the songs are about. After that European tour, I think Jesse wanted to get rid of Josh anyway. So, we talked about whatever, and that tour was just grueling, and definitely I was either going to quit the band and the band was going to be over, or we were going to do something about the situation the band was in and make this thing really work.
I was mad because we'd kicked Dan out, in my opinion, the core of what ZAO is, the good part of it, everybody was a good part of it, but you know what I mean, that thing. And here we are again, new band member. It's been 6 weeks. I was like, yeah, I was totally this is a freaking circus. So we go on tour in Europe. I get hurt right away, it's oblivion. Me and Rob, Josh get off the plane. I get freaking put in containment in Europe because I get off the plane completely sober. Josh and Rob are so trashed. They ask them what they're doing there, blah, blah, blah. It just started off really weird. Day 2, we play a festival in Belgium with Dillinger to 2,000 people. I fall being an idiot, break 3 of my ribs. Rob dislocates his shoulder. So the rest of Europe, I am in complete sedation because I need to be in a hospital and I'm not a European citizen. So, and then it really got divided. So divided that we rode in different cars and didn't speak at all. And basically got off the plane. I told Scott, yeah, good tour. I'll see you around. I think he knew I was going to quit or wanted kicked out or something.
In the back of my mind and all this whole time, I'm thinking of all the hard work and all the money and all the things that Carl put into this and Ferret did for the band. So that was always there, and I couldn't see the band breaking up again and getting back to the point where it was after all this work and all this stuff that Farrah did for us.
I think that tour ended on the 22nd of December or the 14th or something. We were on tour in Europe for like 12 days. Christmas, New Year's, I get a call from him on January 4th or 5th, and he's like, I can't do this anymore. You know, I was like, I just basically told him, I'm like, I don't give a rip. I don't want to do it anymore. You write all the songs, you and Russ. I'll come and play drums on them. That'll be that. Be a Carl record.
Jesse made it very abundantly clear that he didn't really want to do this band. He wanted to do this record and quit and be done with it, make his money, be happy, be over. And I, on the other hand, was finally back into the situation where I love to do it. I had Russ back with me, and I felt that this could be something for real this time, and I didn't want to turn ZAO back into the breaking up band that it's always been.
Scott tells me this story about how maybe he wants to do it under a different name, but how he's going to get Dan back in the band, and I was just like, that. I went to see David Bowie, and I got on the internet at 2 in the morning, and I put that I quit. And then I got really pissed because I started seeing stuff on the internet that I was kicked out, and I was, you know, even if I was kicked out, it doesn't matter, but I wasn't. But I mean, they'll say that too, you know. I mean, but everybody else says that too. Well, yeah, but I mean, on the internet, everybody's like, Jesse got kicked out of ZAO because he's a prick, blah blah blah, you know. And like for me, it was just like I just can't do it anymore. It's like, I mean, it's proof positive. Like me and Scott and Russ are like seeing Russ. Like when I saw them on Stress, I mean, I haven't seen him in a year. He just walks up to me, he's like, give me your phone, I want to program new numbers in it, you know, and gives me like all these ringers, and like it was just totally natural and like totally cool and like just totally valid that like that's how it should have happened, you know what I mean? I mean, my biggest thing is just like everything that happened in between and like the confusion and stuff, and like I feel guilty for a lot of things that I did, but like I feel like, you know, I got the bad end of it, you know, because I tried to do what was right. You know, I worked so hard for that freaking band to work and had so many obstacles with people that are still in the band that got, you know, dismissed because of whatever drive or prick-like tendencies I had, you know, and it's like, and now they're successful. Now they get a video. I don't want to be Dave Mustaine and Metallica video crying. I'm definitely not. I mean, I'm meeting with Warner Brothers tonight for my band. I could give a damn, you know? I really don't care. I had to move on in my life. But it's like, it's crazy to see like how it all kind of did work out, you know?
And that was kind of when we began the beautiful merger relationship management company of Ryan, which Ryan unbelievably helped that situation. I know that I talked to him many a day, you know, about what we could do, and I know he talked to Carl and stuff, and you know, we tried to make this thing work as best we could. We knew Jesse was going to leave after the record, and my initial reaction was, you know what, let's get him out now, let him quit, let him get out of it, so we can maybe start something and do a fresh record with new people, and the band wouldn't break up, whatever. And definitely having Jesse leave, I think, showed to Dan the dedication and the stability that we could maybe have with me and Russ in it, that there wouldn't be a reason for Dan not to want to be 100% either, because it would pretty much be me, Dan, and Russ's baby now, and nobody else would be there to ruin it because it would be ours. And I think Dan saw that, and I know that Dan always loved the band and always wanted to be in the band, and I knew that he felt extremely hurt and betrayed when you know the whole thing came about with, you know, him leaving, and because of his like supposed not dedication of the band because of his tattoo shop, that when I started talking to Dan about coming back, I told him straight up that I wouldn't do the band unless he would come back in it, and I know Russ felt the same way. So, you know, thank God that Dan was really into doing that, and we brought Dan in.
There have been a couple of different singers within Dan's tenure. You know, if you call Dan's tenure from Blood and Fire up until the present time, there have been times where Dan wasn't in the band, he was at home, he was doing other things, and there were other guys in there. And I can say that all of them did an admirable job, but you know, none of them were as good as Dan, and I think all of them would admit that. And more importantly than just a talent level would be the fact that, you know, Dan is responsible for the lyrics and the feelings that went into those songs. You know, most ZAO songs are extremely personal to Dan. you know, and anybody else singing them is basically just doing a cover band.
We definitely knew that getting a new drummer was going to be probably the hardest thing that we've ever done as a band, because everybody was so focused in on Jesse and his drumming abilities, and you know, thinking that he was the band and thinking that he wrote the songs, which we all know now that that's not true. But I think a lot of kids and a lot of fans, since he was the outspoken one of the band and the one that did most of all the interviews, they looked at Jesse that he was ZAO. So we knew that we had to find somebody that definitely was capable of playing what Jesse played, and you know, maybe bringing something new into it that Jesse didn't bring into it, which maybe even as little as the stability and the love of playing drums would be what it was. We had a slew of people we wanted to talk to, but it just didn't work, and things started getting really scary there, and we almost came to a decision where Russ would play the drums on the record, because Russ is a great drummer and he could have definitely done it. But you know, kind of weird how things come full circle, because we were doing Jade Meridian with Steve and Sean, and all of a sudden we're drummerless and bass playerless, which is exactly what those two guys did.
I was in the band Jade Meridian with Sean and Scott and Russ, and we had done that for a while, and that was really the first experience I ever had, like touring, was with Jade Meridian. I think we went out with like Anne Berlin and like Under Oath and stuff. I always heard the drama and everything like that, you know, with Jesse and all that kind of stuff. And finally, when I learned that, you know, he was done with ZAO, it just seemed like the natural, common sense decision, because I had been in, you know, Jade Meridian with them, and I was like, you know, if you want, you could just, you know, I could try, see how it works, you know. If it doesn't work, you know, it's no problem, you know. But if it does, and I would love to be, you know, in a band like ZAO, you know, and tour and just have fun playing drums.
Steve actually came to me and he's like, I promise you, if you give me a chance to do this, I will practice, work really hard, and I will do this for you. I want to be part of this. I think we could do this, and I want to have a shot at it. And I didn't really know if Steve could really play the style that ZAO was, but at the same time, I know Steve's a very driven type of person, so I'm sure if he put his mind to something, he could do it, and that's exactly what me and Russ thought. So we let him we bought him a double bass pedal, which he hasn't played double bass probably in years and years right before the start of Funeral of God. He took a whole month to rehearse to play this double bass, and it just turned into exactly what we needed. I mean, I think, you know, when people hear the new record and hear Steve play, they might not necessarily hear Jesse, but they hear what ZAO's always needed, which is a solid, real drummer. And he's there, he's playing the parts right every night, playing exactly what the songs need to not overshadow them and not, you know, be as flashy and over top of everybody else, but he plays right in there with all of us. For the first time, I think, in ZAO, we felt like if we did this and got it to work out right, that it would be the best that it's ever been, and it would be the realest that it's ever been.
The record, The Funeral of God, was actually, we had taken around 4 months to write, which is something that ZAO has never done in the past, because ZAO was more or less a put-together project, and, you know, we were always pressed for time. There was always some sort of dramatic event for or Jesse had lived in West Virginia, so we would take we would have 3 hours to drive to to Jesse's house to practice and and to write a record. So it was really cool because when we had first got onto Ferret, it was just finally a sense of freedom and relaxation. We could, Carl was into, a lot more ideas as far as what Solid State, had, wanted from us, in the past and stuff. We had just taken as much time as we could, and, me and Scott had gotten together. It was a ZAO that we had never kind of been a part of before because it was so easy and so fluid. It was just different. It was something that we weren't used to. We had went into the studio, I think, in about February, and we were working with the producer-engineer by the name of Eric Rachel. And he was a lot different than what we were used to as far as, an engineer being used to, going to record with. I mean, Barry Pointer, as far as, what he has done for us, I mean, I think it's exactly what we needed at the time. And what Eric Rachel brought to the table, it was just, I think he was used to working with that kind of material. As far as when we went to Barry, he wasn't sure exactly, what we wanted to do. He had, really hadn't had any previous, projects before us, I think, except before Living Sacrifice, which recorded with Barry. But Eric, I think, was exactly what we needed for Funeral of God, because he got us to the point where, it was the first time where we actually had to be particular about, what we were recording, as far as the guitar parts, doing multiple upon multiple takes and guitar parts and multiple tracks of the drums, and we had to be more precise than we were used to in the past. So that was kind of different and kind of new to us, and so we just we went with it. There were times when we were frustrated, but we wanted to come out with something that was totally different and new for ZAO. And so with the 2 weeks of time that we had, we experimented with guitar tones, ton of drum sounds, and just different things that ZAO wasn't used to sounding like before.
And like having Dan come back and sing this record, if he was out of the band, we would never have gotten that record. We would never have gotten those lyrics. We would never have, had a chance to see that come to light with ZAO. And I don't know, that was the best thing about that record are the lyrics. The recording's amazing, the songs are awesome, but
the lyrics, the
lyrics
whole
are
content.
just
we were stoked on it. And it definitely, kind of changed how I looked at a lot of stuff with Christianity and religion as well. I thoroughly, just as a listener, got something out of the record.
It was a cool bomb to drop on everybody. ZAO's back, and look at what their record's called. It was
like shock value, but not shock value for shock value's sake, where it's like, ooh, look at us, we're gonna piss people off. It was like, there's a legitimate thought, and feeling put into the record, and at the same time, it was like, it was anybody that knew ZAO, Funeral God, they're like, wow, what's going on there? And it was cool, and it's like we got that reaction from the press, and and I think kids that actually took a second to be like, whoa, what is, what are they doing, and like actually like read through the lyrics, I think they got something out of it, you know. I mean, we definitely turned a lot of people off, and there was a lot of stores that had carried ZAO in the past that like, refused to carry, just wrote it off right after the title. And you know, I mean, I think that is something they expected when, you know, even when they put together the concept of the record, and it kind of illustrates, you know, the point of the record. Like, you know, you're not the most open-minded dude if you won't even open the book just because of the cover.
Like me quitting opened up a lot for like all of us. Rob quit too, you know. It kind of just freed things up. I mean, I don't know how they see it. You know, we've only hung out once in 2 years, and it was really cool. And I want to be involved in their life. You know, I mean, like life is just crazy, like on every level. You know, for me, ZAO taught me everything. It taught me what God like truly is. It taught me, you know, what it really feels like to have all your friends abandon you and be totally alone. It taught me, you know, not to put certain things before other things, you know. It taught me most of all, like, you have to know yourself, you know. But I mean, I wish them the best, you know. I mean, I have a new band, and, you know, we're getting ready to tour and all the time, and it's cool, and they're happy, you know. And I think it's crazy. It's a wild ride, you know. Like, what, 20 members in freaking 10 years, you know. So it's good. It's cool.
I was bummed every time I heard about a ZAO farewell tour. Like, not because, oh, it's another one, but because I think they're a great band. If they could do it till they're 50, I think they should. I think they're amazing. Yeah.
I think that the one thing that's held strong over the last few years, there's been some different things happening in the band and changes and lineups and just changing and evolving. I think that there has been that strong core of like Dan, you know, whether Dan's in or out, Dan's always he's always in. He's on every record. And no matter what really happens, it's like that trinity of like Russ, Scott, and Dan is like always there. And I think that like you were saying, no matter what happens, that's the core, and like that's like where the music comes from. That's where the talent is, and that's like ultimately like ZAO as we know it. I think that as long as that's strong, everything else will be all right.
I'd be mad at them if they stop now. I mean, on that tour, Scott had a big long talk with me about, you know, the direction that the band wants to head in after this record, and from what he was saying, I really think that they are going to try to stretch what they do more, because they're a band that influenced legions of bands that are out today. And I think that, you know, now's the time that they can go on and forge a completely new sound that'll go on to influence people again. And I think that they'll have big enough musical ambitions and enough talent to really kind of shock people at what they have the talent to do. And I hope that they, you know, I hope their next record's the best record they ever made, and I hope they keep going.
Just looking at it, just hearing kids come up to you and saying, or, you know, explaining how this time in their life, you know, how ZAO has affected them, and how this song or this lyric meant this, you know, crazy part in their lives. I'm blown away about all that stuff, because we just kind of went with the moment and did the best that we could, and then it turned out to be this crazy, you know, crazy entity.
Funeral God, we put that out, and the band and all of us knew that what we're doing here is proving to everybody that ZAO is in fact like a band. They're back, and they're not just throwing out a record. So, you know, the kids that have been buying their records for the last 10 years are going to buy it, and they're going to bounce again. Like, that's why they've toured so hard on this record, like, to make it clear that they're a fully functioning real band. And you know, I think we proved that with Funeral God, and now with this next record, you know, we're not looking to, like, we don't need to reestablish the band. You know, we've done that, and they've done that, and this next record is like, you know, they're going to sit back and just flow, write what they're going to write, and, you know, like, really step out and be like a, you know, full-time band that's just, you know, measures up to, like, you know, their legacy.